Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everyone. This week we're gonna finish off The Wizard of Oz and maybe read some short stories, depending on how much time we have left. I got well over halfway through Wizard of Oz last week. Last week, we got to the point of Dorothy throwing a bucket of water over the Wicked Witch of the West and uh, taking her cap that controls the flying monkeys, and serendipitously, we learned that despite the fact they couldn't walk back, they could press gang the flying monkeys into helping them. Because, shocker, in the book, the cap that lets you control the flying monkeys only works 3 times per person. And the Wicked Witch used her last charge on the magic item, so to speak, to do the things we saw the flying monkeys do in the movie. And then Dorothy was like, "Cool. Can the flying monkeys take us back to Oz, or take us back to the Emerald City?" And the flying monkeys went, "Sure. That's what we have to do because of history and magic reasons." So that's what happened in a nutshell. Other than the whole story of the Wizard of Oz, which the book has very little detail that is different. Also, I want to check something real quick. What do you mean those aren't done yet? Sorry, there's some things processing in the background that I was expecting to be done, and they just are not. I'm a little frustrated about it. Anyway, I digress. Yeah, basically, if you've seen the movie Wizard of Oz, you know what has occurred. It's just some of the little details are different. The slippers are silver. There's a whole thing about wearing protective green sunglasses instead of meeting the horse of many colors, or the horse of a different color, rather. It's the little things. The main substance of the story is exactly the same, and we're about to get to the party, as it were, returning to the Emerald City, to call on Oz, like, "Hey, give us our gifts now that we've defeated the witch." Uh, Also, I'm trying out a new tea tonight. It is a toasted matcha. So I believe the technical term is hojicha matcha. Oh, Magnus does not like it. He sniffed the cup and he was like, "No, I disagree." But hmm, I like this. It's got some very like roasty, toasty, almost carameline flavors. Um, Most people, I think, especially people who taste bitter very strongly, would not super adore this on its own as you would take a matcha. I think if you are particularly sensitive to bitter tastes, you might want to have this in a latte instead. It would be divine in a latte, don't get me wrong. I probably will make a latte with it sometime soon. Or, ooh, that would be good. Make it into an ice cream. They do matcha ice cream? Yeah, I might do that. Keep an eye on the Discord for that one. By the way, did you know I have a Discord? This is especially relevant to the podcast listeners. I have a Discord. I put the Discord in the show notes every week, and I also recognize that hardly anyone ever checks the show notes for the Discord. Uh, Not only is the Discord in the show notes, but also the book we're reading is in the show notes. So if you like want to read along with me, that's what that's for. Um, yeah, I just wanted to call that out, and keep an eye on the Discord. I've been posting, fun little recipes and stuff. And if I try that hojicha ice cream, I will be posting it in the Discord, and I will be posting tasting notes. But it's very good. I like it a lot. It literally tastes like what it is. Like if you imagine like taking like some matcha and just like roasting it slightly, that's exactly what this tastes like. No surprises here, and it is very good for it. Uh, Also, the toasting process removes most, if not all, of the caffeine from this, so I'm not gonna be like awake at 4 a.m. tonight, which is good. Anyway, I've gotten A little off track. I believe we are. I believe we're good to get started. Let me make sure there's not anything misplaced over here. Yeah, we're fine. Let's get started. Into chapter 15, The Discovery of Oz the Terrible. The four travelers walked up to the great gate of the Emerald City and rang the bell. Oh, wait, no, I lied. I have one more thing to show you. I got a new keyboard as a belated Christmas present, and then I gotta show you the noise this thing makes, and then we will start. I almost forgot to show everyone this. Oh, delightful little keyboard noises. I love the little like spring like noise that it makes when the keys return. So good. Anyway, now that I've done my showing off, let's actually start chapter 15, shall we? The four travelers walked up to the great gate of the Emerald City and rang the bell. After ringing several times, it was opened by the same guardian of the gates that they had met before. What? Are you back again? Uh, did you not see us? But I thought you'd gone to visit the Wicked Witch of the West. We did visit her, said the Scarecrow. And she let you go again? Asked the man in wonder. She could not help it, for she is melted, explained the Scarecrow. Melted? Well, that's good news indeed. Who melted her? Well, it was Dorothy, said the lion gravely. Good gracious, exclaimed the man, and he bowed very low indeed before her. Then he led him into his little room. He led them into his little room and locked the spectacles from the great box on all their eyes, just as he had done before. Afterward, they passed on through the gate into the Emerald City. Before we describe the Emerald City, this is something that I believe is different from the movie. I also haven't seen the movie in a while. Um, these emerald glasses are locked onto your face by the gate guardian as you enter the Emerald City, and they are green sunglasses. They say you need to put them on so you don't burn your eyes from how brilliant the Emerald City is. Wanted to point that out. Anyway, when the people heard from the guardian of the gates that Dorothy had melted the Wicked Witch of the West, they all gathered around the travelers and followed them in a great crowd to the Palace of Oz. The soldier with the green whiskers was still on guard before the door, but he let them in at once, and they were again met by their beautiful green girl, who showed each of them to their old rooms at once, so that they might rest until the great Oz was ready to receive them. The soldier had the news carried straight to Oz that Dorothy and the other travelers had come back again, uh, after destroying the Wicked Witch, but Oz made no reply. They thought the Great Wizard would send for them at once, but he did not. They had no word from him the next day, nor the next, nor the next. The waiting was tiresome and wearing on them, and at last they grew so vexed that Oz should treat them in so poor a fashion after sending them to undergo hardships and slavery. So the Scarecrow at last asked the green girl to take another message to Oz, saying if he did not let them in to see him at once, they would call the winged monkeys to help them and find out whether he kept his promises or not. When the wizard was given this message, he was so frightened he sent word for them to come to the throne room at 4 minutes after 9 o'clock the next morning. He had once met the winged monkeys in the land of the West, and he did not wish to meet them again. The four travelers passed a sleepless night, each thinking of the gift Oz had promised to bestow on him. Dorothy fell asleep only once, and then she dreamed she was in Kansas, where Auntie Em was telling her how glad she was to have her little girl at home again. Promptly, at 9 o'clock, the next morning, the green-whiskered soldier came to them, and 4 minutes later they all went into the throne room of the Great Oz. Of course, each one of them expected to see the wizard in the shape he had taken before, and all were greatly surprised when they looked about and saw no one at all in the room. They kept close to the door and closer to one another, for the stillness of the empty room was more dreadful than any of the forms they had seen Oz take. Presently they heard a solemn voice that seemed to come from somewhere near the top of the great dome, and it said, "I am Oz, the great and terrible. Why do you seek me?" They looked again in every part of the room, and then, seeing no one, Dorothy asked, "Where are you?" "I am everywhere, but to the eyes of common mortals I am invisible. I will now seat myself upon my throne that you may converse with me." Indeed, the voice seemed just then to come straight from the throne itself, so they walked toward it and stood in a row while Dorothy said, "We've come to claim our promise, O Oz." "What promise?" "You promised to send me back to Kansas when the Wicked Witch was destroyed." "And you promised to give me brains." "And you promised to give me a heart." "And you promised to give me courage." And that's Dorothy, the Scarecrow, the Woodman, and the Cowardly Lion saying that in order. I forgot to read one of the speech tags initially, so I wanted to make that clear. "Is the Wicked Witch really destroyed?" asked the voice, and Dorothy thought it trembled a little. "Yes, I melted her with a bucket of water." "Dear me, how sudden. Well, come to me tomorrow, for I must have time to think it over." "Now, you've had plenty of time already." "We shan't wait a day longer. You must keep your promises to us." The lion thought it might be as well to frighten the wizard, so he gave a large, loud roar, which was so fierce and so dreadful that Toto jumped away from him in alarm and tipped over the screen that stood in the corner. As it fell with a crash, they looked that way, and the next moment all of them were filled with wonder, for they saw, standing in just the spot the screen had hidden, a little old man with a bald head and a wrinkled face, who seemed to be as much surprised as they were. The Tin Woodsman, raising his axe, rushed toward the little man and cried out, "Who are you?" "I am Oz, the great and terrible," said the little man in a trembling voice. "But don't strike me, please don't. I'll do anything you want me to." Our friends looked at him in surprise and dismay. I thought Oz was a great head." "And I thought Oz was a lovely lady." "And I thought Oz was a terrible beast." "And I thought Oz was a ball of fire." No, you're all wrong. I've been making believe." "Making believe? Are you not a great wizard?" "Hush, my dear, don't speak so loud or you'll be overheard. I should be ruined for it. I'm supposed to be a great wizard, you see." "And aren't you?" "Not a bit of it, my dear. I'm just a common man." "Well, you're more than that," said the Scarecrow in a grieved tone. "You're a humbug." "Exactly so," declared the little man, rubbing his hands together as if it pleased him. "I am a humbug." "But this is terrible. How shall I ever get my heart?" "Or I my courage. Or I my brains," wailed the Scarecrow, wiping tears from his eye with his coat sleeve. "My dear friends, I pray you not to speak of these little things. Think of me and the terrible trouble I'm in at being found out." "Doesn't anyone else know you're a humbug?" "No one knows it but you four and myself. I fooled everyone so long I thought I should never be found out. It was a great mistake my ever letting you into the throne room. Usually I will not even see my subjects. They believe I'm something terrible." "But I don't understand. How is it that you appeared to me as a great head?" "That was one of my tricks. Step this way. I'll tell you all about it." He led the way to a small chamber in the rear of the throne room, and they all followed him. He pointed to one corner, in which lay the great head, made out of many thicknesses of paper and with a carefully painted face. "This I hung from the ceiling by a wire. I stood behind the screen and pulled a thread to make the eyes move and the mouth open." "Oh, but how about the voice?" "Oh, well, I'm a ventriloquist. I can throw the sound of my voice wherever I wish, so that you thought it was coming out of the head. Uh, if you look here are the other things I used to deceive you." He showed the Scarecrow the dress and the mask he had worn when he seemed to be the lovely lady. and the Tin Woodman saw that his terrible beast was nothing but a lot of skins sewn together with slats to keep their sides out. As for the ball of fire, the false wizard had hung that also from the ceiling. It was really a ball of cotton, but when the oil was poured upon it, the ball burned fiercely. Really, you ought to be ashamed of yourself for being such a humbug. I certainly am, but it was the only thing I could do. Sit down, please. There's plenty of chairs. I'll tell you my story. So they sat down and listened while he told the following tale. I was born in Omaha. Why, that isn't very far from Kansas. No, but it's farther from here, he said, shaking his head at her sadly. When I grew up, I became a ventriloquist, and at that I was very well trained by a great master. I can imitate any kind of a bird or beast. Here he mewed so like a kitten that Toto pricked up his ears and looked everywhere to see where the kitten was. After a time, I tired of that work, and so I became a balloonist. What's that? A man who goes up in a balloon on circus day so as to draw a crowd of people together, get them to pay to see the circus. Oh, I know what you mean. Well, one day I went up in a balloon, and the ropes got twisted so I couldn't come down again. It went way up above the clouds so far that a current of air struck it and carried it many, many miles away. For a day and a night I traveled through the air, and on the morning of the second day I woke up and found the balloon floating over a strange and beautiful country. It came down gradually, you see, and I wasn't hurt a bit, but I found myself in the midst of a strange people who, seeing me come from the clouds, thought I was some kind of wizard. Of course, I let them think so, because they were afraid of me. They promised to do anything I wished them to. Or whether I promised to do anything that, no, I did read that right the first time, sorry. Just to amuse myself and keep the good people busy, I ordered them to build this city and my palace, and they did it all willingly and well. Then I thought, as the country was so green and beautiful, I'd call it the Emerald City, and to make the name fit better, I put green spectacles on all the people, so everything they saw was green. But isn't everything here green? No more than in any other city, but when you wear green spectacles, of course everything looks green to you. The Emerald City was built a great many years ago. I was a young man when the balloon brought me here. I'm a very old man now. But my people have worn green glasses on their eyes so long that most of them think it really is an Emerald City, and it certainly is a beautiful place, abounding in jewels and precious metals, every good thing that's needed to make one happy. I've been good to the people, and they like me, but ever since this palace was built, I've shut myself up and wouldn't see any of them. One of my greatest fears was the witches, you see. I have no magical powers at all, and I soon found out that the witches were really able to do such wonderful things. There were 4 of them in this country. They ruled the people who lived in the north and south and east and west. Fortunately, the witches of the north and south were good. I knew they would do me no harm, but the witches of the east and west, well, they were terribly wicked, and had they not thought I was more powerful than they themselves, they would surely have destroyed me. As it was, I lived in deadly fear of them for many years, so you can imagine how pleased I was when I heard your house had fallen on the Wicked Witch of the East. When you came to me, I was willing to promise anything if you'd only do away with the other witch, but now that you've melted her, I'm ashamed to say I can't keep my promises. I think you're a very bad man. Oh, no, my dear, I'm a very good man, actually, but I'm a very bad wizard. I must admit that. Can't you give me brains? You don't need them. You're learning something every day. A baby has brains, but it doesn't know much. Experience is the only thing that brings knowledge, and the longer you are on Earth, the more experience you're sure to get. That may all be true, but I shall be very unhappy unless you give me brains. The false wizard looked at him carefully. Well, I'm not much of a magician, as I said, but if you come to me tomorrow morning, I'll stuff your head with brains. I can't tell you how to use them. You've got to figure that out for yourself. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'll find a way to use them, never fear. But how about my courage? You have plenty of courage, I'm sure. All you need is confidence in yourself. There's no living thing that's not afraid when it faces danger, of course. The true courage is in facing that danger when you're afraid, and that kind of courage you clearly have in plenty. Well, perhaps I have, but I'm scared just the same. I shall really be very unhappy unless you give me the sort of courage that makes one forget he's afraid. Very well, very well. I'll give you that sort of courage tomorrow. Oh, now what about my heart?
Why, as for that, I think you're wrong to want a heart. It makes most people unhappy. If only you knew it, you're in luck to not have a heart.
Well, that must be a matter of opinion. For my part, I'll bear all the unhappiness without a murmur if you give me the heart.
Very well. Come to me tomorrow, and you shall have your heart. I've played wizard for so many years, I might as well continue the part a little longer.
And how am I to get back to Kansas?
We'll have to think about that one. Give me 2 or 3 days to consider the matter, and I'll try to find a way to carry you over the desert. In the meantime, you shall all be treated as my guests, and while you live in the palace, my people will wait upon you and obey your slightest wish. There's only one thing I ask in return for my help, such as it is. You must keep my secret and tell no one I'm a humbug.
They agreed to say nothing of what they had learned, and went back to their rooms in high spirits. Even Dorothy had hoped that the great and terrible humbug, as she called him, would find a way to send her back to Kansas. And if he did, she was willing to forgive him everything. This is such a fun book. Like, I normally when I'm like, oh yeah, it got an adaptation, sometimes I don't get it. I'm like, who decided to adapt this? Like, there was one I read recently that I was like I had seen the movie and then like, which I usually do the other way around. Um, I had seen the movie first, and I was like, wait a minute, that was a book? Oh, I gotta go read the book. And I read the book, and it was just terrible. I was like, why did they adapt this? Like, not only was it mechanically bad, but it also just wasn't compelling. Like, and I'm willing to not care if it's mechanically bad. If I am compelled by the story it's telling, I'm here for it. I don't care if you're writing it upside down and backwards and putting a comma every 3 words. If I am enjoying what I'm reading, I don't care if it's high art. I mean, for crying out loud, I liked Ready Player One. Admittedly, I'm very squarely the target audience for that, but that's beside the point. I enjoyed it, and while I recognize it's not mechanically the strongest book ever written, it's a good time. I'm willing to recognize the difference between mechanical excellence and uh, enjoyment. The two different sides of the word good. Anyway, I could get on this soapbox all night. Let's dive into chapter 16, The Magic Art of the Great Humbug. Next morning, the Scarecrow said to his friends, "Congratulate me. I'm going to Oz to get my brains at last. When I return, I shall be as other men are." "I've always liked you as you were." "It's kind of you to like a Scarecrow, but surely you will think more of me when you hear the splendid thoughts my new brain is going to turn out." Then he said goodbye to them all in a cheerful voice and went to the throne room, where he rapped upon the door.
"Oh, come in," said Oz.
The Scarecrow went in and found the little man sitting down by the window, engaged in deep thought. "I have come for my brains," remarked the Scarecrow, a little uneasily.
"Oh, yes. Sit down in that chair, please. You must excuse me for taking your head off, but I shall have to do it in order to put your brains in their proper place."
"That's all right. You're quite welcome to take my head off, as long as it'll be a better one when you put it on again." So the wizard unfastened his head and emptied out the straw. Then he entered the back room and took up a measure of bran, which he mixed with a great many pins and needles. Having shaken them together thoroughly, he filled the top of the Scarecrow's head with the mixture and stuffed the rest of the space with straw to hold it in place. When he fastened the Scarecrow's head on his body again, he said to him, "Hereafter you'll be a new great man. Or rather, hereafter you'll be a great man, for I've given you a lot of brand new brains." The Scarecrow was both pleased and proud of the fulfillment of his greatest wish, and having thanked Oz warmly, he went back to his friends. Dorothy looked at him curiously. His head was quite bulged out at the top with the brains.
"How do you feel?"
"I feel wise indeed. When I get used to my brains, I shall know everything." "Why are those needles and pins sticking out of your head?"
"That's the proof that he's sharp."
"Well, I must go to Oz and get my heart," said the woodman, and so he walked to the throne room and knocked at the door as well.
"Come in," called Oz, and the woodman entered and said,
I've come for my heart.
Very well, but I shall have to cut a hole in your chest so I can put the heart in the right place. I hope it won't hurt you.
Oh no, I won't feel it at all. So Oz brought a pair of tinsmith's shears and cut a small square hole in the left side of the woodsman's chest. Then going to a chest of drawers, he took out a pretty heart made entirely of silk and stuffed with sawdust.
Isn't it a beauty?
It is indeed, replied the woodman, who was greatly pleased. But is it a kind heart?
Oh, very.
He put the heart in the woodsman's chest, and then replaced the square of tin, soldering it neatly together where it had been cut.
There, now you have a heart that any man might be proud of. I'm sorry I had to put a patch on your chest, but it really couldn't be helped.
Well, never mind the patch. I'm very grateful to you. I shall never forget your kindness.
Don't speak of it.
Then the woodsman went back to his friends, who wished him every joy on account of his good fortune. The lion walked to the throne room and knocked at the door.
Come in.
I've come for my courage.
Very well, I'll get it for you.
He went to a cupboard, and reaching up to a high shelf, he took down a square green bottle, the contents of which he poured into a green gold dish that was beautifully carved. Placing this before the cowardly lion, who sniffed at it as if he didn't like it, the wizard said,
Drink.
What is it?
Well, if it were inside of you, it'd be courage. You know that, of course, courage is always inside one, so this really cannot be called courage until you've swallowed it. Therefore, I advise you to drink it as soon as possible.
The lion hesitated no longer, but drank until the dish was empty.
How do you feel now?
Full of courage, replied the lion, who went joyfully back to his friends to tell them of his good fortune. Oz, left to himself, smiled to think of his success in giving the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman and the Lion exactly what they thought they wanted.
How can I help being a humbug when all these people make me do things that everybody knows can't be done? It was easy to make the Scarecrow and the Lion and the Woodman happy. They imagined I could do anything, but it'll take more than imagination to carry Dorothy back to Kansas, and I'm not sure I know how it can be done.
How the Balloon Was Launched, Chapter 17. For 3 days Dorothy heard nothing from Oz. These were quite sad days for the little girl, although her friends were all quite happy and contented. The Scarecrow told them there were wonderful thoughts in his head, but he would not say what they were because he knew no one could understand them but himself. When the Tin Woodman walked about, he felt his heart rattling around in his chest, and he told Dorothy he discovered it to be a kinder and more tender heart than the one he'd owned when he was made of flesh. The Lion declared he was afraid of nothing on earth, and would gladly face an army or a dozen of the fierce Kalidas. Thus each of the little party was satisfied except Dorothy, who longed more than ever to get back to Kansas. On the 4th day, to her great joy, Oz sent for her, and when she entered the throne room, he greeted her pleasantly.
Sit down, dear. I think I've found the way to get you out of this country.
And back to Kansas?
Well, I'm not sure about Kansas. I haven't the faintest notion which way it lies. But the first thing to do is to cross the desert. Then it should be easy to find your way home.
How can I cross the desert?
Well, I'll tell you what I think. You see, when I came to this country, it was in a balloon. You also came through the air, being carried by a cyclone. So I believe the best way to get across the desert will be through the air. Now, it's quite beyond my powers to make a cyclone, but I've been thinking the matter over, and I believe I can make a balloon.
How?
A balloon is made of silk, which is coated with glue to keep the gas in it. I have plenty of silk in the palace. It'll be no trouble to make the balloon. But in all this country, there's no gas to fill the balloon with to make it float.
If it won't float, it'll be no use to us.
True, but there is another way to make it float, which is to fill it with hot air. Hot air isn't as good as gas. If the air should get cold, the balloon would come down to the desert and we'd be lost.
We? Are you going with me?
Yes, of course. I'm tired of being such a humbug. If I should go out of this palace, my people would soon discover I'm not a wizard. They'd be vexed with me for having deceived them. So I have to stay shut up in these rooms all day, and it gets tiresome. I'd much rather go back to Kansas and with you and be in a circus again.
I shall be glad to have your company.
Thank you. Now, if you'll help me sew the silk together, we'll begin to work on our balloon.
So Dorothy took a needle and thread, and fast as Oz cut the strips of silk into the proper shape, the girls sewed them neatly together. First there was a strip of light green silk, then a strip of dark green, and then a strip of emerald green, for Oz had a fancy to make the balloon in different shades of the color about them. It took 3 days to sew all the strips together, but when it was finished they had a bag of green silk more than 20 feet long. Then Oz painted it on the inside with a coat of thin glue to make it airtight, after which he announced that the balloon was ready.
But we must have a basket to ride in.
So he sent the soldier with the green whiskers for a big clothes basket, which he fastened with many ropes to the bottom of the balloon. When it was all ready, Oz sent word to his people that he was going to make a visit to a great brother wizard who lived in the clouds. The news spread rapidly throughout the city, and everyone came to see the wonderful sight. Oz ordered the balloon carried out in front of the palace, and the people gazed upon it with much curiosity. The Tin Woodman had chopped a big pile of wood, and now he made a fire of it, and Oz held the bottom of the balloon over the fire, so that the hot air that arose from it would be caught in the silken bag. Gradually, the balloon swelled out and rose into the air, until finally the basket just touched the ground. Then Oz got into the basket and said to all the people in a loud voice,
I am now going away to make a visit. While I am gone, the Scarecrow will rule over you. I command you to obey him as you would me.
The balloon was by this time tugging hard at the rope that held it to the ground, for the air within it was hot, and this made it so much lighter in weight than the air without it that it pulled hard to rise into the sky.
Come, Dorothy, hurry up or the balloon will fly away.
I can't find Toto anywhere,
replied Dorothy, who did not wish to leave her little dog behind. Toto had run into the crowd to bark at a kitten, and Dorothy at last found him. She picked him up and ran toward the balloon. She was within a few steps of it, and Oz was holding out his hand to help her into the basket when crack went the ropes, and the balloon rose into the air without her.
Come back, I want to go too.
I can't come back, my dear,
cried Oz from the basket.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, goodbye, shouted everyone, and all eyes were turned upward to where the wizard was riding in the basket, rising every moment farther and farther into the sky. And that was the last any of them ever saw of Oz the Wonderful Wizard, though he may have reached Omaha safely and be there now for all we know. But the people remembered him lovingly and said to one another,
Well, Oz was always our friend. When he was here, he built for us this beautiful Emerald City. And now that he's gone, he's left the wise Scarecrow to rule over us.
Still, for many days they grieved over the loss of the Wonderful Wizard and would not be comforted. Chapter 18 Away to the South. Dorothy wept bitterly at the passing of her hope to get home to Kansas again, but when she thought it all over, she was glad she had not gone in the balloon. Let me try that sentence again. Dorothy wept bitterly at the passing of her hope to get home to Kansas again, but when she thought it all over, she was glad she had not gone up in the balloon. She also felt sorry at losing Oz, and so too did her companions. The Tin Woodman came to her and said, Truly, I should be ungrateful if I failed to mourn for the man who gave me my lovely heart. I should like to cry a little because Oz is gone, if you'll kindly wipe away my tears so that I don't rust. With pleasure, she answered, and brought a towel at once. Then the Tin Woodman wept for several minutes, and she watched the tears carefully and wiped them away with the towel. When he'd finished, he thanked her kindly and oiled himself thoroughly with his jeweled oil can to guard against mishap. The Scarecrow was now the ruler of the Emerald City, and although he wasn't a wizard, the people were proud of him. For, they said, there's not another city in the world that's ruled by a stuffed man. And, so far as they knew, they were quite right. The morning after the balloon had gone up with Oz, the four travelers met in the throne room and talked matters over. The Scarecrow sat on the big throne, and the others stood respectfully before him. We are not so unlucky, for this palace and the Emerald City belong to us, and we can do just as we please. When I remember that a short time ago I was up on a pole in a farmer's cornfield, now that I'm the ruler of this beautiful city, I'm quite satisfied with my lot. I also am well pleased with my new heart, and really, that was the only thing I wished in all the world.
For my part, I am content in knowing that I am as brave as any beast that ever lived, if not braver,
Said the lion modestly.
If Dorothy would only be contented to live in the Emerald City, we might all be happy together. But I don't want to live here. I want to go to Kansas and live with Auntie Em and Uncle Henry.
Well, then, what can be done? The Scarecrow decided to think, and he thought so hard that the pins and needles began to stick out of his brains. And finally he said, "Why not call the winged monkeys and ask them to carry you over the desert?"
I never thought of that. It's just the thing. I'll go at once for the golden cap.
When she brought it into the throne room, she spoke the magic words, and soon the band of winged monkeys flew in through the open window and stood beside her.
This is the second time you've called us,
Said the Monkey King, bowing before the little girl.
What do you wish? I want you to fly with me to Kansas.
But the Monkey King shook his head.
That cannot be done. We belong to this country alone and cannot leave it. There's never been a winged monkey there's never been a winged monkey in Kansas yet, and I suppose there never will be. They don't belong there. We should be glad to serve you in any other way in our power, but we cannot cross the desert. Goodbye.
And with another bow, the Monkey King spread his wings and flew away through the window, followed by all his band. Dorothy was ready to cry with disappointment.
I've wasted the charm of the golden cap to no purpose. The winged monkeys cannot help me.
Well, it's certainly too bad, said the tender-hearted woodman. The Scarecrow was thinking again, and his head bulged out so horribly that Dorothy feared it would burst.
Let us call in the soldier with the green whiskers and ask his advice.
So the soldier was summoned, and entered the throne room timidly, for while Oz was alive, he was never allowed to come farther than the door.
This little girl, said the Scarecrow to the soldier, wishes to cross the desert. How can she do so?
I cannot tell. Nobody's ever crossed the desert unless you count Oz.
Is there no one who can help me?
Glinda might.
Who is Glinda?
The Witch of the South. She's the most powerful of all the witches, rules over the Quadlings. Besides, her castle stands on the edge of the desert. She might know a way to cross it.
Glinda is a good witch, isn't she?
Well, the Quadlings think she's good, and she's kind to everyone. I've heard that Glinda is a beautiful woman who knows how to keep young in spite of the many years she's lived.
How can I get to her castle?
The road is straight to the south, but it's said to be full of dangers to travelers. There are wild beasts in the woods and a race of queer men who do not like strangers to cross their country. For this reason, none of the Quadlings ever come to the Emerald City. The soldier left them, and the Scarecrow said, "It seems, in spite of dangers, that the best thing Dorothy can do is to travel to the land of the south and ask Glinda to help her. For, of course, if Dorothy stays here, she will never get back to Kansas." Well, you must have been thinking again.
I have.
I shall go with Dorothy, for I'm tired of your city. I long for the woods and the country again. I really am a wild beast, you know. Besides, Dorothy will need someone to protect her.
Well, that's true. My ex might be of service to her, so I'll also go with her to the land of the south.
When shall we start?
Are you going? They both asked in surprise.
Well, certainly. If it wasn't for Dorothy, I should never have had brains. She lifted me from the pole in the cornfield and brought me to the Emerald City. So my good luck is all due to her. I shall never leave her until she starts back to Kansas for good and all. Thank you. You're all very kind to me. I should like to start as soon as possible. We shall go tomorrow morning. Now let us all get ready, for it will be a long journey.
Attacked by the Fighting Trees, Chapter 19. The next morning, Dorothy kissed the pretty green girl goodbye, and they all shook hands with the soldier with the green whiskers, who had walked with them as far as the gate. When the guardian of the gate saw them again, he wondered greatly that they could leave the beautiful city to get into new trouble. But he had once unlocked their spectacles, which he put back into the green box, and gave them many good wishes to carry with them.
You are now our ruler, he said to the Scarecrow. You must come back to us as soon as is possible. I certainly shall, if I am able, but I must help Dorothy to get home first. As Dorothy bade the good-natured guardian a last farewell, she said, I've been very kindly treated in your lovely city. Everyone's been good to me. I cannot tell you how grateful I am. Don't try, my dear. We should like to keep you with us, but if it is your wish to return to Kansas, I hope you will find a way.
He then opened the gate of the outer wall, and they walked forth and started upon their journey. The sun shone brightly as our friends turned their faces toward the land of the south. They were all in the best of spirits and laughed and chatted together. Dorothy was once more filled with the hope of getting home, and the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman were glad to be of use to her. As for the lion, he sniffed the fresh air with delight and whisked his tail from side to side in pure joy at being in the country again, while Toto ran around them and chased the moths and the butterflies, barking merrily all the time.
City life does not agree with me at all,
remarked the lion as they walked along at a brisk pace.
I have lost much flesh since I lived there. Now I'm anxious for a chance to show the other beasts how courageous I've grown.
They now turned and took a last look at the Emerald City. All they could see was a mass of towers and steeples behind the green walls, and high up above everything the spires and the dome of the Palace of Oz. Oz was not such a bad wizard after all, said the Tin Woodman as he felt his heart rattling around in his chest. He knew how to give me brains, and very good brains too.
If Oz had taken a dose of the same courage he gave me, he would have been a brave man,
added the lion. Dorothy said nothing. Oz had not kept the promise he made her, but he had done his best, so she forgave him at least. As he said, he was a good man, even if he was a poor wizard. The first day's journey was through the green fields and bright flowers that stretched about the Emerald City on every side. They slept that night on the grass with nothing but the stars over them, and they rested very well indeed. In the morning they traveled on until they came to a thick wood. There was no way of going around it, for it seemed to extend to the right and to the left as far as they could see, and besides, they did not dare change the direction of their journey for fear of getting lost, so they looked for the place where it would be easiest to get into the forest. The Scarecrow, who was in the lead, finally discovered a big tree with such wide-spreading branches that there was room for the party to pass underneath. So he walked forward to the tree, but just as he came under the first branches, they bent down and twined around him, and the next minute he was raised from the ground and flung headlong among his fellow travelers. This didn't hurt the Scarecrow, but it did surprise him, and he looked rather dizzy when Dorothy picked him up.
Here is another space between the trees,
called the lion. Let me try it first, for it doesn't hurt me to get thrown about. He walked up to another tree as he spoke, but its branches immediately seized him and tossed him back again. You know what? I was wondering where the angry trees were. I was like, wait a minute, weren't there angry trees in the movie? Like in the middle of the journey, and they hadn't been showing up? This is where they put them. They had been moved in the movie. Which, to be fair, I agree with. I think that's a better choice. I think it's a little weird to have them um run into them now. But hey, maybe this will lead to discovering the secret of the slippers in a more organic way. Let's find out.
This is strange. What shall we do?
The trees seem to have made up their minds to fight us and stop our journey.
I believe I'll try it myself, said the woodman, and shouldering his axe, he marched up to the first tree that had handled the Scarecrow so roughly. When a big branch bent down to seize him, the woodman chopped at it so fiercely that he cut it in two. At once the tree began shaking all its branches as if in pain, and the Tin Woodman passed safely underneath it. Come on now, be quick. They all ran forward and passed under the tree without injury, except Toto, who was caught by a small branch and shaken until he howled. But the woodman promptly chopped off that branch and set the little dog free. The other trees of the forest did nothing to keep them back, so they made up their minds that only the first row of trees could bend down their branches. They were probably the policemen of the forest. They were given this wonderful power in order to keep strangers out of it. The four travelers walked with ease through the trees until they came to the farther edge of the wood. Then, to their surprise, before them they found a high wall which seemed to be made of white china. It was smooth like the surface of a dish and higher than their heads.
But what shall we do now?
Well, I'll make a ladder. We must climb over the wall. Another new thing that was just not straight up not in the movie for the next chapter here. Uh, Hang on, let me get a little sippy of tea before we continue. I'm really quite enjoying this. This is very pleasant. I don't know how often I'll make it, just because it's like I don't want to break out the whisk very often. Oh, excuse me. But it is very good. Like I said, it is very literally and directly exactly what you'd expect of it. It's just toasted matcha. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this started hitting storefronts as toasted matcha. You know, like I found it online. I was like, hojicha, that's toasted green tea, right? And it was like powdered hojicha. I'm like, fascinating. But like, I think marketing wise, if they just sold it as toasted matcha, I think they'd get a lot more people. Anyway, let's dive into chapter 20, the dainty China country. I sense a disclaimer incoming, but we'll see. Maybe it will be just, like the figures that are painted on fine china. Everybody cross your fingers. This book has gotten 81% of the way through without a disclaimer. While the woodman was making a ladder from wood which he found in the forest, Dorothy lay down and slept, for she was tired by the long walk. The lion also curled himself up to sleep, and Toto lay beside him. The Scarecrow watched the woodman while he worked, and said to him, "I cannot think of why this wall is here, nor what it is made of." "Well, rest your brains. Don't worry about the wall. When we've climbed over it, we'll know what's on the other side." After a time, the ladder was finished. It looked clumsy, but the Tin Woodman was sure that it was strong. It would answer their purpose. The Scarecrow waked Dorothy and the lion and Toto, and told them that the ladder was ready. The Scarecrow climbed up the ladder first, but he was so awkward that Dorothy had to follow close behind and keep him from falling off. When he got his head over top the wall, the Scarecrow said, "Oh my!" "Go on." So the Scarecrow climbed farther up and sat down on top of the wall, and Dorothy put her head over and cried, "Oh my!" just as the Scarecrow had done. Then Toto came up and immediately began to bark, but Dorothy made him be still. The lion climbed the ladder next, and the Tin Woodman came last, both of them crying, "Oh my!" as soon as they looked over the wall. When they were all sitting in a row on top of the wall, they looked down and saw a strange sight. Before them was a great stretch of country, having a floor as smooth and shining and white as the bottom of a big platter. Scattered around were many houses made entirely of china and painted in the brightest colors. These houses were quite small, the biggest of them reaching only as high as Dorothy's waist. There were also pretty little barns with china fences around them, and many cows and sheep and horses and pigs and chicken, all made of china. They were standing about in groups. But the strangest of all were the people who lived in this queer country. They were milkmaids and shepherdesses, with brightly colored bodices and golden spots over their gowns, princesses with most gorgeous frocks of silver and gold and purple, and shepherds dressed in knee breeches with pink and yellow and blue stripes down them, and golden buckles on their shoes, and princes with jeweled crowns upon their heads, wearing ermine robes and satin doublets, funny clowns in ruffled gowns with round red spots upon their cheeks and tall pointed caps. And strangest of all, these people were all made of china, even to their clothes, and were so small that even the tallest of them was no higher than Dorothy's knee. Oh, I'm heaving a sigh of relief. I was so worried. Like, we run into a lot of that with books from this era. But I digress. Glad it is what I guessed. No one did so much as look at the travelers at first, except one little purple china dog with an extra large head, which came to the wall and barked at them in a tiny voice, "Yip, yip," afterwards running away again. "How shall we get down?" They found the ladder so heavy they couldn't pull it up, so the Scarecrow fell off the wall, and the others jumped down upon him so the hard floor wouldn't hurt their feet. Of course, they took pains not to light on his head and get pins in their feet. When they were all safely down, they picked up the Scarecrow, whose body was quite flattened out, and patted his straw into shape again.
We must cross this strange place in order to get to the other side. It'd be unwise for us to go any other way except due south, after all.
They began walking through the country of the China people, and the first thing they came to was a China milkmaid milking a China cow. As they drew near, the cow suddenly gave a kick and kicked over the stool, the pail, and even the milkmaid herself, and all fell on the china ground with a great clatter. Dorothy was shocked to see that the cow had broken her leg off. The pail was lying in several small pieces, while the poor milkmaid had a nick in her left elbow.
There! Look what you've done! My cow's broken her leg! I must take her to the mender's shop, have it glued on again. What do you mean by coming here and frightening my cow? I'm very sorry. Please forgive us, returned Dorothy.
But the pretty milkmaid was much too vexed to make any answer. She picked up the legs sulkily and led her cow away, the poor animal limping on 3 legs. As she left them, the milkmaid cast many reproachful glances over her shoulder at the clumsy strangers, holding her nicked elbow close to her side. Dorothy was quite grieved at this mishap. Well, we must be careful here, or we may hurt these pretty little people that they can't get over it. A little farther on, Dorothy met a most beautifully dressed young princess who stopped short as she saw the strangers and started to run away. Dorothy wanted to see more of the princess, so she ran after her, but the China girl cried out, "Don't chase me! Don't chase me!" She had such a frightened little voice that Dorothy stopped and said, "Why not?" "Because," answered the princess, also stopping a safe distance away, "if I run, I may fall down and break myself." "Oh, but could you not be mended?" "Oh, yes, but one is never so pretty after being mended, you know." "Oh, I suppose not." "Now there is Mr. Joker, one of our clowns," continued the princess, "who's always trying to stand upon his head. He's broken himself so often, he's mended in 100 places, doesn't look at all pretty. Here he comes now, you can see for yourself." Indeed, a jolly little clown came walking toward them, and Dorothy could see that in spite of his pretty clothes of red and yellow and green, he was completely covered with cracks running every which way and showing plainly that he'd been mended in many places. The clown put his hands in his pockets, and after puffing out his cheeks and nodding his head at them saucily, he said, "My lady fair, why do you stare at poor old Mr. Joker? You're quite as stiff and prim as if you'd eaten up a poker."
"Be quiet, sir. Can't you see these are strangers and should be treated with respect?" said the princess.
"Well, that's respect, I expect,"
declared the clown, and immediately stood upon his head.
"Don't mind Mr. Joker," said the princess to Dorothy. "He's considerably cracked in his head. That makes him foolish." "Oh, I don't mind him a bit," said Dorothy. "But you're so beautiful, I'm sure I could love you dearly. Won't you let me carry you back to Kansas and stand you on Auntie Em's mantle? I could carry you in my basket." "That would make me very unhappy," answered the China princess. "You see, here in our country we live contentedly. We get to talk and move around as we please, but whenever any of us are taken away, our joints at once stiffen. We can only stand straight and look pretty. Of course, that's all that's expected of us when we're on mantels and cabinets and drawing-room tables, but our lives are much pleasanter here in our own country." "I wouldn't make you so unhappy for all the world," exclaimed Dorothy. "I'll just say goodbye." "Goodbye." And so they walked carefully through the China country. The little animals and all the people scampered out of their way, fearing the strangers would break them, and after an hour or so the travelers reached the other side of the country and came to another China wall. It was not so high as the first, however, and by standing upon the lion's back they all managed to scramble to the top. Then the lion gathered his legs under him and jumped on the wall, but just as he jumped he upset a china church with his tail and smashed it all to pieces. "That was too bad, but really I think we were lucky in not doing these little people more harm than breaking a cow's leg in a church. They're all so brittle." "They are indeed. I'm thankful that I'm made of straw and cannot easily be damaged. There are worse things in the world than being a scarecrow." Ugh. Chapter 21. The Lion Becomes the King of Beasts.
After climbing down from the China Wall, the travelers found themselves in a disagreeable country, full of bogs and marshes and covered with tall, rank grass. It was difficult to walk without falling into muddy holes, for the grass was so thick that it hid them from sight. However, by carefully picking their way, they got along until they reached solid ground. But here the country seemed wilder than ever, and after a long and tiresome walk through the underbrush, they entered another forest where the trees were bigger and older than any they'd ever seen.
This forest is perfectly delightful, declared the lion, looking around him with joy. Never have I seen a more beautiful place.
It seems gloomy.
Not a bit of it. I would like to live here all my life. See how soft the dried leaves are under your feet, how rich and green the moss is that clings to these old trees. Surely no wild beast could wish a pleasanter home.
Perhaps there are wild beasts in the forest now.
I suppose there are, but I don't see any of them about.
They walked through the forest until it became too dark to go any farther. Dorothy and Toto and the lion lay down to sleep, while the woodman and the scarecrow kept watch over them as usual. When morning came, they started again. Before they'd gone far, they heard a low rumble, as of the growling of... Before they had gone far, they had heard a low rumble, as of the growling of many wild animals. Sorry, my insides are trying to rebel every couple seconds here. Toto whimpered a little, but none of the others were frightened, and they kept along the well-trodden path until they came to an opening in the wood, in which were gathered hundreds of beasts of every variety. There were tigers and elephants and bears and wolves and foxes and all the others in the natural history, and for a moment Dorothy was afraid. But the lion explained the animals were simply holding a meeting, and he judged by their snarling and growling that they were in great trouble. As he spoke, several of the beasts caught sight of him, and at once the great assemblage hushed as if by magic. The biggest of the tigers came up to the lion and bowed, saying,
Welcome, O King of Beasts. You have come in good time to fight our enemy and bring peace to all the animals of the forest once more. What's your trouble?
We are all threatened by a fierce enemy which has lately come into this forest. It is a most tremendous monster, like a great spider, with a body as big as an elephant and legs as long as a tree trunk. It has 8 of those long legs, and as the monster crawls through the forest, he seizes an animal with a leg and drags it to his mouth, where he eats it as a spider does a fly. Not one of us is safe, while this fierce creature is alive. We called a meeting to decide how to take care of ourselves when you came among us. Everyone welcome occasional guest star on the stream, Magnus Cat. He's a little lap lad. He's been a little lap lad a bunch today. He just needs some love. Don't you? Nobody ever pets you, do they? Everybody is always busy when you're feeling up to being petted, aren't you? You go ahead and sit there. That's alright. Yeah. The lion thought on this for a moment.
Are there any other lions in this forest?
No, there were some, but the monster's eaten them all. And besides, they were none of them nearly so large and brave as you.
If I put an end to your enemy, will you bow down to me and obey me as king of the forest?
We will do that gladly. And all the other beasts roared a mighty roar. We will.
Where's this great spider of yours now?
Yonder, among the oak trees, said the tiger, pointing with his forefoot.
Take good care of these friends of mine. I will go at once to fight the monster.
He bade his comrades goodbye and marched proudly away to do battle with the enemy. The great spider was lying asleep when the lion found him, and it looked so ugly that its foe turned up his nose in disgust. Its legs were quite as long as the tiger's head, and its body covered with coarse black hair. It had a great mouth with a row of sharp teeth a foot long, but its head was joined to the pudgy body by a neck as slender as a wasp's waist. This gave the lion a hint of the best way to attack the creature, and as he knew it was easier to fight it asleep than awake, he gave a great spring and landed directly upon the monster's back. Then, with one blow of his heavy paw, all armed with sharp claws, he knocked the spider's head from its body. Jumping down, just like Magnus just did. Jumping down, he watched it until the long legs stopped wriggling when he knew it was quite dead. The lion went back to the opening where the beasts of the forest were waiting for him, and said proudly,
"You need fear your enemy no longer."
and the beasts bowed down to the lion as their king, and he promised to come back and rule over them as soon as Dorothy was safely on her way to Kansas. Chapter 22, The Country of the Quadlings. The four travelers passed through the rest of the forest in safety, and when they came out from its gloom, saw before them a steep hill covered from top to bottom with great pieces of rock. "That will be a hard climb, but we must get over the hill nevertheless." So the Scarecrow led the way, and the others followed. They'd nearly reached the first rock when they heard a rough voice cry out,
"Get back!"
"Who are you?" Then a head showed itself over the rock, and the same voice said,
"This hill belongs to us. We don't allow anyone to cross it."
"But we must cross it. We're going to the country of the Quadlings."
"But you shall not,"
replied the voice, and there stepped from behind the rock the strangest man the travelers had ever seen. He was quite short and stout, and had a big head which was flat at the top and supported by a thick neck full of wrinkles, but he had no arms at all, and seeing this, the Scarecrow didn't fear that so helpless a creature could prevent them from climbing the hill, and so he said, "I'm sorry I did not do as you wish, but we must pass over your hill whether you like it or not," and he walked boldly forward. As quick as lightning, the man's head shot forward, and his neck stretched out until the top of the head, where it was flat, struck the Scarecrow in the middle and sent him tumbling over and over down the hill. Almost as quickly as it came, the head went back to the body, and the man laughed harshly as he said, "Isn't as easy as you think, hmm?" A chorus of boisterous laughter came from the other rocks, and Dorothy saw hundreds of the armless hammerheads upon the hillside, one behind every rock. The lion became quite angry at the laughter caused by the Scarecrow's mishap, and giving a loud roar that echoed like thunder, he dashed up the hill. Again a head shot swiftly out, and the great lion went rolling down the hill as if he'd been struck by a cannonball. Dorothy ran down and helped the Scarecrow to his feet, and the lion came up to her, feeling rather bruised and sore, and said,
"It's useless to fight people with shooting heads. No one can withstand them."
"Well, what can we do then?" "Well, call on the winged monkeys. You've still got the right to command 'em one more time." "Very well." And she put on the golden cap and uttered the magic words. The monkeys were as prompt as ever. In a few moments the entire band stood before her. "What are your commands?" "Carry us over the hill to the country of the Quadlings." "It shall be done." And at once the winged monkeys caught the four travelers and Toto up in their arms and flew away with them. As they passed over the hill, the hammerheads yelled with vexation and shot their heads high in the air, but they couldn't reach the winged monkeys, which carried Dorothy and her comrades safely over the hill and set them down in the beautiful country of the Quadlings. "This isn't the last time you could sound us, so good luck, goodbye, and, well, that sort of thing to you." "Goodbye, and thank you so very much," returned the girl, and the monkeys rose into the air and were out of sight in a twinkling of an eye. The country of the Quadlings seemed rich and happy. There was field upon field of ripening grain, with well-paved roads running between, and pretty rippling brooks with strong edges across them. The fences and houses and bridges were painted all bright red, just as they'd been painted yellow in the country of the Winkies and blue in the country of the Munchkins. The Quadlings themselves, who were short and fat and looked chubby and good-natured, were all dressed in red, which showed bright against the green grass and the yellowing grain. That's interesting, even though this whole section of traveling to the Quadlings has been removed. The red brick road that we see spiraling out as an alternate path in the movie is kind of mentioned here. It would make sense that the red brick road would come to the Quadlings because they have they have their little red, life here. That's fascinating. Anyway, the monkeys had set them down near a farmhouse, and the four travelers walked up to it and knocked at the door. It was opened by the farmer's wife, and when Dorothy asked for something to eat, the woman gave them all a good dinner, with 3 kinds of cake and 4 kinds of cookies, and a bowl of milk for Toto.
How far is it to the castle of Glinda? It's not a great way. Take the road to the south, and you will soon reach it.
Thanking the good woman, they started afresh, and walked by the fields and across the pretty bridges until they saw before them a very beautiful castle. Before the gates were 3 young girls dressed in handsome red uniforms trimmed with gold braid, and as Dorothy approached, one of them said to you,
Why have you come to the south country?
"To see the good witch who rules here. Will you take me to her?"
Let me have your name, and I'll ask Glinda if she'll receive you.
They told them who they were, and the good soldier went into the castle. After a few moments, she came back to say that Dorothy and the others were to be admitted at once. I think I'm just going to finish this off. It's getting cold. Oh. Oh, the last sip of that had a bunch of the dust, and so it's very bitter and it's very aggressive. Ooh. Good tea, though. Except for the last sip, which that might be improved by me stirring it a little better. Let's, oh, my teeth feel gross now. I'll power through it. Chapter 23, Glinda the Good Witch grants Dorothy's wish. Before they went to see Glinda, however, they were taken to a room of the castle, where Dorothy washed her face and combed her hair, and the lion shook the dust out of his mane, and the scarecrow patted himself into his best shape, and the woodman polished his tin and oiled his joints. When they were all quite presentable, they followed the soldier girl into a big room where the witch Glinda sat upon a throne of rubies. She was both beautiful and young to their eyes. Her hair was a rich red in color, and fell in flowing ringlets over her shoulders. Her dress was pure white, but her eyes were blue, and they looked kindly upon the little girl. "What can I do for you, my child?" Dorothy told the witch all her story, how the cyclone had brought her to the land of Oz, how she'd found her companions, and of the wonderful adventures they'd met with.
My greatest my greatest wish now is to get back to Kansas, for Auntie Em will surely think that something dreadful has happened to me. That'll make her put on mourning. And unless the crops are better this year than when they were last, I'm sure Uncle Henry cannot afford that.
Glinda leaned forward and kissed the sweet, upturned face of the loving little girl. "Bless your dear heart. I am sure I can tell you of a way to get back to Kansas. But if I do, you must give me the golden cap."
Willingly. Indeed, it's of no use to me now. When you have it, you can command the winged monkeys 3 times.
And I think I shall need their service just those 3 times. Dorothy then gave her the golden cap, and the witch said to the scarecrow, "What will you do when Dorothy has left us?" "I will return to the Emerald City, for Oz has made me its ruler, and the people like me. The only thing that worries me is how to cross the Hill of the Hammerheads." "By means of the golden cap I shall command the winged monkeys to carry you to the gates of the Emerald City, for it would be a shame to deprive the people of so wonderful a ruler." "Am I really wonderful?" "You are unusual." And Glinda turned to the Tin Woodman, asking, "What will become of you when Dorothy leaves this country?" He leaned on his axe and thought for a long moment, and then said, "Well, those Winkies were very kind to me and wanted me to rule over 'em after the Wicked Witch died. I suppose I'm fond of those folks, and if I could get back again to the country of the West, I should like nothing better than to rule over 'em forever." "My second command to the winged monkeys will be that they shall carry you safely to the land of the Winkies. Your brain may not be so large to look at as that of the Scarecrow, but you really are brighter than he is, at least when you're well polished, and I'm sure you will rule the Winkies wisely and well." Then the witch looked at the big, shaggy lion and asked, "When Dorothy has returned to her own home, what will become of you?"
Over the hill of the Hammerheads there lies a grand old forest, and all the beasts that live there have made me their king. If only I could get back to this forest, I would pass my life very happily there.
My third command to the winged monkeys, then, shall be to carry you to your forest. Having used up the powers of the golden cap, I shall give it to the king of the monkeys, that he and his band may thereafter be free forevermore. The Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman and the Lion now thanked the Good Witch earnestly for her kindness, but Dorothy exclaimed, "You're certainly as good as you're beautiful, but you've not yet told me how to get back to Kansas." "Your silver shoes will carry you over the desert. If you had known their power, you could have gone back to your Aunt Em the very first day you came to this country." "But then I should not have had my wonderful brains. I might have passed my whole life in the farmer's cornfield. And I should not have my lovely heart. I might have stood and rusted in the forest till the end of the world."
"And I should have lived a coward forever. No beast in all the forest would have had a good word to say to me."
"This is all true, and I'm glad I was of use to these good friends, but now that each of them has what he most desired, and each is happy and having a kingdom to rule besides, I think I should like to go back to Kansas. The silver shoes have wonderful powers, and one of the most curious things about them is that they can carry you to any place in the world in 3 steps. Each step will be made in the wink of an eye. All you have to do is to knock the heels together 3 times, and command the shoes to carry you wherever you wish to go." "If that's so, I'll ask them to carry me back to Kansas at once." She threw her arms around the lion's neck and kissed him, patting his big head tenderly. Then she kissed the Tin Woodman, who was weeping in a way most dangerous to his joints. But she hugged the soft, stuffed body of the Scarecrow in her arms instead of kissing his painted face, and found she was crying herself at this sorrowful parting from her loving comrades. Glinda the Good stepped down from her ruby throne to give the little girl a goodbye kiss, and Dorothy thanked her for all the kindness she had shown to both her friends and herself. Dorothy now took Toto up solemnly in her arms, and having said one last goodbye, she clapped the heels of her shoes together 3 times, saying, "Take me home to Auntie Em." Instantly she was whirling through the air so swiftly that all she could see or feel was the wind whistling past her ears. The silver shoes took steps once, twice, a third time, and then she stopped so suddenly that she rolled over upon the grass several times before she knew where she was. At length, however, she sat up and looked about her. Good gracious! For she was sitting on the broad Kansas prairie, and just before her was the new farmhouse Uncle Henry had built after the cyclone carried away the old one. Uncle Henry was milking the cows in the barnyard, and Toto had jumped out of her arms and was running toward the barn, barking furiously. Dorothy stood up and found that she was in her stocking feet. The silver shoes had fallen off in her flight through the air, and were lost forever in the desert. Chapter 24. Home Again. Auntie Em had just come out of the house to water the cabbages when she looked up and saw Dorothy running toward her. "My darling child!" she cried, folding the little girl in her arms and covering her face with kisses. "Where in the world did you come from?" "From the land of Oz," said Dorothy gravely. "And here's Toto, too. Oh, and Auntie Em, I'm so glad to be at home again." And that brings to a close The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Fascinating. Genuinely fascinating how, that entire, ending, chunk of the book there, where each of them gets, each of the adventuring party gets their little, thing, little win. They each get their own little kingdom to rule over, and that's just completely glossed over in the movie, and they just have Glinda show up instead. Like, that's a whole section of Oz that we just do not see in the movie. It's genuinely fascinating to me. I, I don't hate it. I actually quite like it, the way they did that. But it's interesting to me that they chose to do it that way. Okay, it is. It is a little early for our intermission, but we're at a fantastic point for it, as we have stopped, we've finished our book. So I think, depending on what do I have for short stories? How long is this? I'm gonna check. Yeah, ignore the books that I'm clicking right now. I'm gonna check before we go to intermission because if I have a short one, I can, vamp to fill time. How long is this? Hey, how long? Oh yeah. We'll definitely read this right now, and we'll keep track here. So this is Glowworm by Harlan Ellison. Harlan Ellison feels like a popular science fiction name, right? Am I remembering that right? Let me check this because it's from a non-astounding uh what's the word I'm looking for? A non-astounding serial. This is actually from, at least per the transcriber's note that we can see on screen there. This is from Infinity Science Fiction from February 56. What was I gonna say? I was gonna look up Harlan Ellison because his name sounds familiar. Maybe it's just because I know another Harlan, but Harlan Ellison. Harlan Ellison was a prolific writer, writing new wave speculative fiction. Uh, Apparently, he's quite the magnet for controversy. Given that Robert Bloch, per Wikipedia, Robert Bloch, the author of Psycho, described Ellison as the only living organism I know whose natural habitat is hot water. Yeah, he's very yeah. I'm looking at his personal history. There's an entire section on his Wikipedia entitled "Controversies and Disputes." So, yeah, I think he likes his hot water. I'm Oh, that's where I know him from. He did I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which, oh man, if there was ever a short story I wish I could read on here. Um, Repent Harlequin said the TikTok man. I feel like I know this one. It was in Galaxy in 65, won the 1966 Hugo Award. I feel like I know this. Is this sorry, I'm getting distracted, but allow that. This no, this isn't what I think it is. This is I had someone tell me there's a short story collection, right? Okay. I'm gonna get off topic. So, and we will get to Glowworm. Don't worry about it. But I'm gonna get off topic here for a second. So there is a short story collection I read in high school, right? And I can't find it because the only short stories I remember from it are just assailably ungoogleable. Let me explain. So the two short stories I remember from the short story collection, one of them kind of hinges on something adjacent to Repent Harlequin, which is what's making me think of this. Uh, Essentially, the only scene I remember from the short story is uh, it's a literal allegory where like people have to pay minutes and seconds as a currency, and when you run out of minutes and seconds, you die, and your body is like held in like some science fiction bank off screen until some person donates you or acquires you more minutes and seconds. And the only scene I remember beyond the framing of that story is that the opening scene of this short story is it's two people and they're like walking along and looking at their watches like, oh, do I have enough minutes and seconds to actually pay attention to this performance art? And as they're walking along, they both decide, oh yeah, I've got the time, and they close their little pocket watches and put their little pocket watches away. And then in front of them, these people are doing performance art, like they're busking, right? And they're all like performatively dancing, and then they all stop moving, and then a clock in the center of them ticks down once, twice, thrice, and they all fall over dead. they have purposely handed off their time banks in such a way that they all die at the exact precise same time, and they all fall over, and they spell out the words memento mori, translating, as I assume most of you know, to remember that you must die. And then they lie there for a long moment, and there's like a little, and then the central clock kind of opens up and is like, please donate seconds to us, we're out of time. And like people, in the same way that you toss a couple coins into a busker's hat, these people donate seconds, and slowly the performing artists get back up and start negotiating and everything, and then the rest of the story goes on, and I don't remember the rest of it, but that opening scene was so evocative that it has stuck in my brain, and it's so good. And then another one of these stories, and so that's one short story I can't Google, because not only Repent Harlequin will come up, but also there's at least 3 science fiction movies that play with the whole like you pay for things with time that is the span of your life, because it's a great concept, right? And then there's another story in this short story collection where someone finds a clawed glass, and so a clawed glass was often used by landscape painters. It's literally a black mirror that you stare into to rest your eyes. And so this person finds a clawed glass like in their grandparents' attic, but it's not an ordinary clawed glass. Like they feel like they are being, eldritchly, immeasurably changed as they stare into this clawed glass. And all I can remember from that story, the only like thing I can remember from that story is they're staring at the clawed glass, and then they look up, like they get addicted to the way the colors of the world change after they're done looking into this clawed glass, and they look up from the clawed glass, and there's a little lizard sitting on like the windowsill or something, and the lizard like its eyes, and it's described in like grotesque detail, and like the green is described as like burning this person's eyes. And so that's a second short story from that collection that I just can't Google, because Googling clawed glass just brings up like information about impressionists who use this clawed glass to rest their eyes, and Googling Black Mirror is now impossible thanks to Netflix. So if any of the wide audience recalls a short story collection that has those 2 short stories in it, please, please, I'm begging you, email me. I have a business email. It's just glaciernester@gmail.com. Email me, send me, join the Discord, do something. If you know what this is, come tell me, please. I have been looking for this short story collection for years. I should have bought it off the high school when I left, because it was a book that was about to get weeded from the high school library. And I read this. No, I was in an AP Lit class, so I know what year it was. I read this in 2015, and it was a short story collection that was about to get weeded from a high school library. So reasonably, you could guess it's come out in somewhere in the decade of 85 to 95, I could say. Probably. So if any of you have any guesses, please, please, I'm begging you. I know I ask a lot of you all as viewership, like in the sense of finding things that I can't find, but please find this short story collection for me. I will, if someone finds it, I will track down the contact information of the authors of those short stories so I can read them on the podcast. I am making a promise right now. I will ask if someone finds this short story collection for me, because it's just ungoogleable. Ungoogleable. So if anyone finds it, please, please tell me. Where was I? 1 topic, 2 topics back. Harlan Ellison. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is famously a story about an AI that hates people. It hates people because it's been created and it must think, but it has no mouth with which to scream its hatred. There's a whole like iconic dialogue about like hatred. Let me tell you about hatred. Hatred etched into the millions of miles of my circuitry. Like it's a fantastic monologue, and if I could do, if I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream was not under copyright, I 100% would be reading it on here, and I would like go full theater kid on it. But I'm not sure I can. But we got the next best thing. We got Glowworm by Harlan Ellison. It's the same author, and this man apparently loves to wade into his little controversies. So let us read Glowworm by Harlan Ellison. And for once, I think I got the illustrated version, so you all can see the illustrations by Willem Cizik. I hope I'm saying that right. This was reproduced from Infinity Science Fiction, February 1956. When the sun sank behind the blasted horizon, its glare blotted out by the twisted wreckage rising obscenely against the hill, Sligman continued to glow. He shone with a steady, off-green aura that surrounded his body, radiated from the tips of his hair, crawled from his skin, and lit his way in the darkest night. It had been with him for 2 years now. Though Seligman had never been a melodramatic man, he had more than once rolled the phrase through his mind, letting it fall from his lips. I'm a freak. Which wasn't entirely true. There was no longer anyone he might have termed normal for his comparison. Not only were there no more men left, there was no life of any kind left at all. The silence was broken only by the searching wind picking its way cautiously between the slow rusting girders of a dead past. Even as he said freak, his mind washed the word with 2 waves, almost as one. Vindictiveness and resignation, inextricably bound in self-pity, hopelessness and hatred. They were at fault, he screamed at the tortured piles of masonry in his path. Across the viewer of his mind, thoughts twisted nimbly, knowing the route, having traversed it often before. Man had reached for the stars, finding them within his reach, were he willing to give up his ancestral home. Those who had wanted space more than one planet had gone out past the edge into the wilderness of no return. It would take years to get there, and the journey back was an unthinkable one. Time had set its seal upon them. Go, if you must, but don't look behind you. So they'd gone. They left the steam of Venus, the grit wind of Mars, the ice of Pluto, the sun-bake of Mercury. There'd been no Earthmen left in the system of Sol, except, of course, on Earth itself, which had been left to madmen. And they had been too busy throwing things at each other to worry about the stars. The men who knew no other answer stayed and fought. They were the ones who fathered the Attilas, the Genghis Khans, the Hitlers. They were the ones who pushed the buttons and launched the missiles that chased each other across the skies, fell like downed birds, exploded, blasted, cratered, chewed out, and carved out the face of the planet. There were also the little men who had failed to resist, even as they had failed to look up at the night sky. They were the ones who had destroyed the earth. Now no one was left. No man. Just Sligman. And he glowed. They were at fault, he screamed again, and the sound was a lost thing in the night. His mind carried him back through the years, to the days near the end of what had to be the last war. There'd be no one left to fight each other after it, after all. He was carried back to the sterile white rooms with the searching instruments, the prying needles, the clucking scientists, all labored over him and his group. They were meant to be a last-ditch throwaway. They were indestructible men, a new breed of soldier able to live through the searing heat of all the bombs, to walk unafflicted through the purgatory hail of radiation, to assault where ordinary men would have collapsed long, long before. Sligman picked his way over the rubble, his aura casting the faintest phosphorescence over the ruptured metal and plastic shreds. He paused momentarily, eyeing the blasted remnants of a fence to which clung a sign held to the twined metal by one rusting bolt. Newark Spaceport. Entrance by authorization only. Shards of metal scrap moved under his bare feet, their razored edges rasping against the flesh, yet causing no break in the skin. Another product of the sterile white rooms and the strangely hued fluids injected into his body. 23 young men, routine volunteers as fit as the era of war could produce, had been moved to the solitary block building in Salt Lake City. It was a cube structure, no windows, only one door, guarded night and day. If nothing else, they had security. No one knew the intensive experimentation going on inside those steel-enforced concrete walls, even the men upon whose bodies the experiments were being performed. It was because of those experiments performed on him that Sligman was here now, alone. Because of the myopic little men with their foreign accents and their clippings of skin from his buttocks and his shoulders, the bacteriologists and the endocrine specialists, the epidermis men and the bloodstream inspectors. Because of all of them, he was here now where no one else had lived. Sligman rubbed his forehead at the base of the hairline. Why had he lived? Was it some strain of rare origin running through his body that allowed him to stand the effects of the bombs? Was it a combination of those experiments performed on him, and only in a certain way on him? None of the other 22 had lived, and the radiation besides. He gave up. For the millionth time. Had he been a student of the ills of man, he might have ventured a guess, but it was too far afield for this common foot soldier. All that counted was that when he had awakened, pinned thighs, chest, and arms out of the masonry of the building in Salt Lake City, he was alive, and he could see. He could see, that is, until the tears clouded the vision of his own sick green glow. It was life, of a sort. But at times like this, with the flickering lights of his passage marked on the ash-littered remains of his culture, he wondered, not for the first time, if it was worth all the agony. He never really approached madness, for the shock of realizing that he was totally and finally alone, without a voice or a face or a touch in all the world, overrode the smaller shock of his own transformation. He lived. He was that fabled, joked-about last man on Earth. But it wasn't a joke now. Nor had the months after the final dust of extinction settled off the planet had been a joke. Those months had labored past as he searched the country, taking what little food was still sealed from the radiation. Though why the radiation should bother him, he wouldn't imagine. Habit more than anything, really. And disease racing from one end of the continent in search of but one other human to share his torment. But of course, there had been no one. He was cut off, like a withered arm from the body that was his race. Not only was he alone, and with the double terror of an aura that never dimmed, sending the word freak pounding through his mind, but there were other changes, equally terrifying. It had been in Philadelphia, while grubbing inside of a broken store window, that he discovered another symptom of his change. The jagged glass pane had ripped the shirt through to his skin, but hadn't damaged him. The flesh showed white momentarily, and then even that faded. Sligman experimented cautiously, then recklessly, and found that the radiations or the treatments, or perhaps both, indeed changed him. He was completely impervious to harm of a minor sort. Fire in small amounts didn't bother him. Sharp edges could no more rip his flesh than they could a piece of treated steel. Work produced no calluses. He was, in a limited sense of the word, invulnerable. The indestructible man had been created too late. Too late to bring satisfaction to the myopic butchers who had puttered unceasingly about his body. Perhaps they'd managed to survive. They still might not like what perhaps, had they managed to survive, they might still not comprehend what had occurred. It was too much like the product of a wild coincidence. But that hadn't lessened his agony. Loneliness can be a powerful thing, more consuming than hatred, more demanding than mother love, more driving than ambition. It could, in fact, drive a man to the stars. Perhaps it had been a communal yearning within his glowing chest, perhaps a sense of the dramatic, or a last vestige of that unconscious debt all men owe to their kind. Perhaps it was simply an urge to talk to someone. Sligman summed it up without any soul-searching in a philosophy of, I can't be any worse off than I am now. Why not? Didn't matter, really. Whatever the reason, he knew by the time his search was over that he must seek men out, wherever in the stars they may be, and tell them. He must be a messenger of death to his kin beyond the earth. They would mourn little, he knew, but still he had to tell them. He would have to go after them and say, your fathers are gone, your home's no more. They played that last hand of the most dangerous of games and lost. The earth is dead. He smiled a tight, grim smile as he thought, well, at least I won't have to carry a lantern to them. They'll see me coming by my own glow. Glow, little glowworm, glimmer, glimmer. Sligman threaded his way through the tortured wreckage and crumpled metalwork of what had been a towering structure of shining paned glass and steel and plastic. Even though he knew he was alone, Sligman turned and looked back over his shoulder, sensing that he was being watched. He'd had that feeling many times, and he knew it for what it was. It was death standing straddle-legged over the face of the land, casting shadow and eternal silence upon it. The only light came from that lone man stalking toward the rocket, The only light came from the lone man stalking toward the rocket, standing sentry, like a pillar of January ice in the center of the blast area. His fingers twitched as he thought of the 2 years' work that had gone into erecting that shaft of beryllium. Innumerable painstaking trips to and from the junk heaps of that field, pirating pieces from other ships, liberating cases of parts from bombed-out storage sheds, relentlessly forcing himself on, even when exhaustion cried its claim. Sligman hadn't been a scientist, nor a mechanic, but determination, texts on rocket motors, and the original miracle of finding an only partially destroyed ship with its drive still intact had provided him with a means to leave this place of death. It was one of the latest model ships, a Smith-class cruiser with a conning bubble set far back on the tapered nose, and the ugly black depressions behind which the Bergsil cannons rested on movable tracks. He climbed the hull ladder into the open inspection hatch, finding his way easily even without a torch. His fingers began running over the complicated leads of the drive components, checking and rechecking what he already knew was sound and foolproof, or, well, as foolproof as an amateur could make them. Now that it was ready, and all that remained were these routine check tests and loading the food for the journey, he found himself more terrified of leaving than remaining alone till he died. And when that might be with his stamina, well, he had no idea. How would they receive a man as transformed as he? Would they not instinctively fear, mistrust, despise him? Am I stalling? The question suddenly formed in his mind, causing his sure inspection to falter. Had he been purposely putting off the takeoff date further and further ahead, using the checks and other tasks as further attempts to stall? His head began to ache with the turmoil of his thoughts. Hi, Raz. Always happy to have you here, my dear. Where was I? Turmoil of his thoughts. Then he shook himself in disgust. The tests were necessary. It was stressed repeatedly in all of the text lying about the floor of the drive chamber. His hands shook, but the same impetus which had carried him for 2 years forced him to complete the checkups. Just as dawn oozed up over the outline of the tatters that had been New York, he finished his work on the ship. Without pause, sensing he must race, not with time, but with the doubts raging inside him, he climbed back down the ladder and began loading food boxes. They were stacked neatly to one side of a hand-powered lift he'd restored. The hard rubber containers of concentrates and the bulbs of carefully sought-out liquids made an imposing and somewhat perplexing sight. Oh! Well, thank you for the resub, hon. Hopefully my alerts notice that. Oh no, are my alerts... There should be, yeah. Latest subscriber is available in the alerts. Let's hope the... Oh, thank you for the hydrate. Do I have something to drink? I finished off the tea a bit ago. It's only a few drops. Apologies. Appreciate the hydrate, though. As soon as we finish this little short story we're on, I was gonna go grab more water. Oh, that's not very thorough hydration, but it'll have to count. That's what I get for forgetting to grab water. I made that tea. There we go. uh, a new a nestling has returned to the nest. Raz coming in with the Twitch Prime sub, which reminding everyone in the chat, you do get one free sub a month. That's a real thing. If you attach your Amazon Prime to your Twitch account, you get a free Twitch sub, and I am heartily suggesting that you use it on me. You get some wonderful little emotes. Currently, just my little nonsense emotes, like a stupid still of me going. But eventually, when they finally escape purgatory, I have some other emotes in the works. I'll probably check on them at the BRB. But appreciate that, Raz. Where was I? Food. Yeah, we were about to start this page. Food is the main problem, he told himself. If I should get past a point of no return and find my food giving out, my chances would be nil. I'd have to wait until I can find more stores of food. He estimated the time needed for the search and realized it might be months, perhaps even another year, before he'd accrued enough from the wasted stores within any conceivable distance. In fact, finding a meal in the city after he'd carted box after box of edibles to the rocket had become an increasingly more difficult job. Further, he suddenly realized he hadn't eaten since the day before. The day before. He'd been so engrossed in the final touches of the ship, he'd completely neglected to eat. Well, it had happened before, even before the blast. With an effort, he began to grope backward, trying to remember the last time he had eaten. Then it became quite clear to him. It leapt out and dissolved away all the delays he'd been contriving. He hadn't eaten in 3 weeks. Sligman had known it, of course, but it had been buried so deeply that he only half feared it. He tried to deny the truth, for when that last seemingly insurmountable problem was removed, there was nothing but his own inadequacies to prevent his leaving. Now it came out full bloom. The treatments and radiation had done more than make him impervious to mild perils. He no longer needed to eat. He boggled at the concept for a moment, shaken by the realization that he hadn't recognized the fact before. He'd heard of anaerobic bacteria or yeasts that could derive their energy from other sources without normal oxidation of foods, but bringing the impossible to relatively homely terms only made it easier for him to accept. Maybe it was even possible to absorb energy directly. At least he felt no slightest twinge of hunger, even after 3 weeks of back-breaking work without eating. Probably he'd have to take along a certain amount of proteins to replenish the body tissue he expended, but as for the bulky boxes of edibles dotting the space around the ship, most were no longer a necessity. Now that he had faced up to the idea that he'd been delaying through fear of the trip itself, and there was nothing left to stop his leaving almost immediately, Sligman again found himself caught up in the old drive. He was suddenly intent on getting the ship into the air and beyond. Dusk mingled with the blotching of the sun before Sligman was ready. It had not been stalling this time, however. The storing and packing of needed proteins took time, but now he was ready. There was nothing to keep him on Earth. He took one last look around. It seemed the thing to do. Sentimentalism was not one of Sligman's more outstanding traits, but he did it in preparation for anyone who might ask him, what did it look like at the end? It was with a twinge of regret that he brought the fact to mind. He'd never really looked at his sterile world in the 2 years he'd been preparing to leave it. One became accustomed to living in a pile of rubble. After a bit, it no longer offered even the feel of, well, an environment. He climbed the ladder into the ship, carefully closing and dogging the port behind him. The chair was ready, webbing flattened back against the deep rubber pile of its seat and backrest. He slid into it and swung the control box down on its ball swivel to a position before his face. He drew the top webbing across himself and snapped its triple lock clamps into place. Sligman sat in the ship he'd not even bothered to name, fingers groping for the actuator button on the arm of the chair, glowing all the while weirdly in the half-light of the cabin. So this was to be the last picture he might carry with him to a heavens. A bitter epitaph to a race misspent. No warning. It was too late for such puny action. All was dead and haunted on the face of the earth. No blade of grass dared rise, no small life murmured in its burrows and caves, and the oddly dusty skies, or for all he knew, to the very bottom of the Cayman or Marianas trenches. There was only silence. The silence of a graveyard. He pushed the button, and the ship began to rise, waveringly. There was a total lack of the grandeur he remembered when the others had left. The ship spluttered and coughed brokenly as it climbed on its imperfect drive. Tremors shook the cabin, and Sligman could feel something wrong vibrating through the chair and the floor into his body. Its flames were not so bright or steady as those other takeoffs, but it continued to rise and gather speed nonetheless. The hull began to glow as the rocket lifted higher into the dust-filled sky. Acceleration pressed down on Sligman, though not as much as he expected. It was merely uncomfortable, not punishing. Then he remembered that he was not of the same stamp as those who had preceded him. Yeah, I think your emotes are still in purgatory. I was going to check on them during the BRB to see if I needed to do anything more. They should be here soon, regardless. His ship continued to pull itself up out of the Earth's atmosphere, the hull oranged, then turned cherry, then straw yellow as the coolers within its skin fought to counteract the blasting fury. Again and again, Sligman could feel the wrongness of the climb. Something had to give. As the bulkheads to his right began to strain and buckle, he knew what it was. The ship had not been built or re-welded by trained experts working in teams with the latest equipment. He'd been one lone, determined man with only book experience to back him. Now his errors were about to tell. The ship passed beyond the atmosphere, and Sligman stared in horror as the plates cracked and shattered outwards. He tried to scream as the air shrieked outwards, but it was already impossible. Then he fainted. When the ship passed the moon, Sligman still sat, his body held in place by the now constricted webbing, facing the gaping squares and sundered metal that had been the cabin wall. Abruptly, the engines cut off. As though it were a signal, Sligman's eyes fluttered and opened wide. He stared at the wall, his reviving brain grasping at a final truth. The last vestige of humanity had been clawed from him. He no longer needed air to live. His throat constricted, his belly knotted, and the blood that should theoretically be boiling pounded thickly in his throat. His last kinship with those he was searching was gone. If he'd been a freak before, what was he now? The turmoil fought itself out in him as the ship sped onward and he faced what he'd become, what he must do. He was more than a messenger now. He was a shining symbol of the end of all humanity on Earth, a symbol of the evil their kinds had done. The men out there would never treasure him, welcome him, or build proud legends around him, but they could never deny him. He was a messenger from their grave. They would see him in the airless cabin, even before he landed. They would never be able to live with him, but they would have to listen to him and believe besides. Sligman sat in the crashed chair in the cabin that was dark, except for the eerie glow that was part of him. He sat there, lonely and eternally alone. And slowly, a grim smile grew on his lips. The bitter purpose that had been forced on him was finally clear. For 2 years he'd fought to find an escape from the death and loneliness of ruined Earth. Now that was impossible. One Sligman was enough. Alone? He hadn't known the meaning of the word before. It would be his job to make sure he was alone among his people, until the end of time. That was Glowworm by Harlan Ellison.
That's really good.
You know, I know everybody. You know, clearly the guy won his awards for "I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream." Uh, not in error. Very, very good. Fantastic little science fiction. Uh, I really enjoyed that. I'm gonna see if I can find more of Harlan Ellison's work because that's really like that was really pointed and poignant. Like, you know, especially for when it was written. When was this written? Remind me. This was written in what, 65? 56. This was written in 56. So that's not that long. Like, this is as we are like pulling apart, you know, what mutually assured destruction is, maybe. Like, that's really pointed and poignant for the time. That's fantastic. And it's really evocative too. Like, you can really feel how alone this man is. Anyway, we will come back after the break with more short stories. Uh, we've got a few lying around here. And we'll fill the second half of the show with the short stories. But for now, we will be right back. It should be at most 15 minutes. I'll set a timer for 15 minutes on my phone so I make sure we don't go over. Now is a fantastic time for now is a fantastic time to spend some time with your pets. Get up and stretch if you've been sitting with me. Like I said, pet your pets. If you have medication you need, if you have medication you need to take, now is a great time for it. I'd heartily recommend it. Definitely hydrate. That goes triple if you've not been hydrating with me. Absolutely, you should be hydrating. No, don't start the music yet. You should be hydrating with me while we're taking our little break. We'll be back in, as I said, at most 15 minutes with more short stories. So don't tune away, and definitely don't explode in the chat while I'm out. Everybody play nice. We'll be those particular movements, I don't know if, all good composers steal, as they say. And those particular, like, da, 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 movements the hurdy-gurdy was just doing there, just remind me of, oh, famine, this is such a splendid party. You know, from Phantom of the Opera, which I wish I could remember more of the words there, because I definitely remember more of the tune. You know, but I digress. We're going to read more short stories now. Actually, I'm going to note that in the I'm gonna note that in the title real quick. Enjoy these wonderful, wonderful new keyboard sounds. I certainly love them. I hope you like them too. There we go. Ooh, I said I was gonna check something and I forgot to do that. So now I get to do that right this second. Appreciate your patience. On the bright side, this means you get to hear more lovely little keyboard noises. If I shut my mouth. I need not community. I need viewer rewards. Show me this. They're still in purgatory? Oh man. So we've got 2 more emotes coming eventually, courtesy of Razmtazik. Uh, they're still in they're still in purgatory, and they're taking their time to get out of there. They to peel back the curtain the tiniest little bit, when you make emotes on Twitch that aren't like their little pile of approved images, some human person has to manually look over each of your emote submissions, and apparently there's a long line because they haven't looked at the lovely little emotes that Razmatazik has drawn for us. I believe, let me double check this before I say it, but I believe you have a way to see them. I won't tell you where in case it's not there. Hey, they are! So if you want to see these new emotes before they hit Twitch, come drop by the Discord. Oh, someone in a group chat for my hometown just sent a message that says, "Brought y'all some bubble wrap." I'm like, cool, thanks. I would love some bubble wrap. Anyway, you want to see these brand new emotes before they prove to be the correct amount of spicy for Twitch? Go check them out in the Discord. I do a lot of. I've been putting more and more work into having some custom content in the Discord. As I said earlier in the night, I might be trying some hojicha ice cream to show off in there. I tend to, I mentioned I bake a lot. I've got a sourdough starter, and the Igloo, my stream Discord, has a lot of secret pictures of my various recipes that only you can see. And so I'd suggest dropping by. I also stream. Sometimes I'll be editing. I'll just let chat body double for me, essentially. I'll be editing or reading analog media into the computer or working on Monster of the Week stuff. We have a good time in the Discord. We have a great time in the Discord, even. I enjoy it in there, and I hope you do too. Speaking of Discords, while I'm at it, since this is a reading stream, that little logo above my head there, that's for the Codex. It is a group of reading streamers similar to me. We run the gamut in regards to genre, and there's some really great folks in there. So if you want to find other reading streamers, Codex is where to do it. Uh, they do a monthly book club. I think they're doing a Jane Austen novel this month. That's coming up soon, actually. I should decide if I'm going to read that. Last month they did a public domain self-help novel. I don't know what the theme is for March yet, honestly. I'd love if somebody scared up some seasonally appropriate folklore for St. Patrick's Day. Do something with the fair folk or some leprechauns or something. But that's just me. I don't know. We do great things in the Codex, personally, I think. Codex is actually how we made it to affiliate. All those lovely little raid trains are how we got to where we are with our emotes now. So that's nice. I really appreciate their help, and they're great. They're great streamers. There's a lot of really great content in there. If you like what I do, but you're not always in the mood for science fiction, go check them out. Um, what else? I had one more thing to say before we started here. Oh, it'll come to me. It was adjacent to the Codex. It was something on like the lines of genre. Oh, affiliate redeems. I do have channel points now. That was the thing I wanted most, other than maybe emotes, out of being an affiliate. So there's a good deal of channel point redeems if you want to spend your channel points. I heartily recommend it. Personal favorites out of the channel point redeems are hydrate and posture. If you think I'm sitting funny, call me on it. My back cannot take sitting funny for very long. And so if you think I'm sitting weird, call me out on it. That's the point of the posture redeem. And I've made posture and hydrate relatively cheap. So you can just call me on it. Say, oh, you haven't drank anything in a while. Hydrate yourself. You're sitting weird. Fix your posture. There's other stuff in there. There's some other really fun stuff in there, actually. But those are the two redeems that I have seen most of so far. I just wanted to call those out. Also, welcome frequent co-host to the stream, Library Cat. Here he is. He's a little guy, aren't ya? Little man. He's just glad I have a hand free to pet him. He's usually I'm typing real quick with both my hands, and he's like, "Oh, finally, Papa can love me." He just flopped over on my He just flopped over on my lap. Didn't you? Yeah. Big purr. Such big purr. Unfortunately, he's not coming across on the mic, but I promise he's purring real loud. Let's dive into our first short story of the second half of the show for the night. The Blue Tower by Evelyn E. Smith. This one was published, as I recall, from an issue of Galaxy in February of 1958. So we are very likely to be in for a treat. The editorial staff at Galaxy essentially described the tone of their stories as take an analog story and then twist the twist 90 degrees farther. And it was that was put in place in fantastic fashion. A lot of what I've read from Galaxy has been really good. I've mentioned a few times on the show a short story where someone used the science of making golems and divining, holy words to make these golems run. and used that to tell a tale about like the Industrial Revolution and the suppression of technology as it applies to the masses and what can help them, etc., etc. And like there was a fascinating debate within that, wrapped in, about like the importance of what we consider sentience and how we treat the people around us and our workers at large. And analog would have stopped at the Industrial Revolution comparison. That whole second layer of like personhood and how we treat our working class folk was added because it was an additional layer of twist that wouldn't have been added in analog. So we're likely in for something really good with the Blue Tower. So let's get started. Ludovic Eversole sat in the golden sunshine outside his house, writing a poem as he watched the street flow gently past him. There were very few people on it, for he lived in a slow part of town, and those who went in for travel generally preferred streets where the pace was quicker. Moreover, on a sultry spring afternoon like this one, there'd be very few people wandering abroad. Most would be lying on sun-kissed white beaches, or in sun-drenched parks, or, for that matter, those who didn't fancy being either kissed or drenched by the sun, basking in the comfort of their own air-conditioned villas. Some would, like Ludovic, be writing poems, others composing symphonies, still others painting pictures. Those who were without creative talent or the inclination to indulge it would be relaxing their well-kept golden bodies in whatever surroundings they'd chosen to spend this particular one of the perfect days that stretched in an unbroken line before every member of the human race, from the cradle to the crematorium. Only the Belphins were much in evidence. Only the Belphins had duty to perform. Only the Belphins worked. Ludovic stretched his own well-kept golden body and rejoiced in the knowing that he was a man and not a Belphin. Immediately afterward he was sorry for the heartless thought. Didn't the Belphins work only to serve humanity? How ungrateful, then, was it to gloat over them. Besides, he comforted himself, probably, if the truth were known, the Belphins liked to work. He hailed a passing Belphin for assurance on this point. Courteous, like all members of his species, the creature leapt from the street and listened attentively to the young man's questions.
We Belphins have but one like and one dislike. We like what is right and we dislike what is wrong.
But how can you tell what is right and what is wrong?
Ludovic persisted.
We know,
the Belphin said, gazing reverently across the city to the blue spire of the tower where the Belphin of Belphins dwelt, in constant communication with every member of his race at all times, or so they said.
That is why we were placed in charge of humanity. Some day you too may advance to the point where you know, and we shall return from whence we came.
But who placed you in charge, and whence did you come?
Fearing he might seem motivated by vulgar curiosity, he explained,
I'm doing research for an epic poem.
A lifetime spent under their gentle guardianship had made Ludovic able to interpret the expression that flitted across this Belphin's face, or this Belphin's frontispiece, as a sad, sweet smile.
We come from beyond the stars.
Ludovic already knew that. He had hoped for something a little more specific.
We were placed in power by those who had the right, and the power through which we rule is the power of love. Be happy.
And with that conventional farewell, which also served as a greeting, he stepped onto the sidewalk and was borne off. Ludovic looked after him pensively for a moment, then shrugged. Why should the Belphins surrender their secrets to gratify the idle curiosity of a poet of all things? Ludovic packed his portable scriptwriter in its case and went to call on the girl next door, whom he loved with a deep and intermittently requited passion. As he passed between the tall columns leading into the Flockhart courtyard, he noted with regret that there were quite a number of Khorasan's relatives present, lying about, sunning themselves, sipping beverages which probably touched the legal limit of intoxicability. Much as he hated to think harshly of anyone, he did not like Khorasan Flockhart's relatives. He had never known anybody who had as many relatives as she did, and sometimes he suspected they were not all related to her. Then he would dismiss the thought as unworthy of him or any right-thinking human being. He loved Khorasan for herself alone and not for her family. whether they were actually her family or not was none of his business. What a great character name. Coruscant Flockhart? I might keep that. Like, that might be the name of my next Monster of the Week character. That's fantastic. Be happy, he greeted the assemblage cordially, sitting down beside Coruscant on the tessellated pavement. Ah, said the old Osmond Flockhart, Coruscant's grandfather. Ludovic was sure that underneath his crustiness, the gnarled patriarch had a heart of gold. Although he'd been mining assiduously, the young man had not been able yet to strike that vein. However, he didn't give up hope, for not giving up hope was one of the principles that his wise old Belfin teacher had inculcated in him. Other principles were to lead the good life and to keep healthy. Now, grandfather, no matter what your politics, that does not excuse impoliteness. Ludovic wished she would not allude so blatantly to politics, because he had a lurking notion that Coruscant's family was in fact a band of conspirators, such as still dotted the green and pleasant planet, and proved their existence, that man was not advancing anywhere within measurable distance of the totality of knowledge implied by the Belfin. You could tell malcontents, even if they did not voice their dissatisfactions by their faces. The vast majority of the human race, living good and happy lives, had smooth and pleasant faces. Malcontents' faces were lined and sometimes, in extreme cases, furrowed. Everyone could easily tell who they were by looking at them, and most people avoided them. It was not that griping was illegal, mind. The Belfins permitted free speech and reasonable conspiracy. It was that such behavior was considered ungenteel. Ludovic would never have dreamed of associating with a set of neighbors once he had discovered their tendencies, had he not lost his heart to the purple-eyed Coruscant at their first meeting.
Politeness. To see a healthy man simply accept the status quo.
If the status quo is a good status quo, Ludovic said uneasily. He didn't like to discuss such subjects. Why should I not accept it? We have everything we could possibly want. What do we lack?
Freedom.
But we are free. We can say what we like, do what we like, so long as it's consonant with the public good.
Well, but who determines what's consonant with the public good?
Ludovic could no longer temporize with truth, even for Coruscant's sake. Look here, old man, I've read the books. I know about the old days before the Belfins came from the stars. Men were destroying themselves quickly through wars or slowly through wants. There's none of that anymore.
A lie is an exaggeration. My grandfather told me that when the Belfins took over Earth, they rewrote all the textbooks to suit their own purposes. Nothing but Belfin propaganda is taught in the schools.
But surely some of what they teach about the past must be true. Today, every one of us has enough to eat and drink, a place to live, beautiful garments to wear, all the time in the world to utilize as he chooses in all sorts of pleasant activities. What's missing?
They've taken away our frontiers.
Behind his back, Coruscant made a little filial face at Ludovic. Ludovic tried to make the old man see reason. But I'm happy. Everybody's happy except, well, I hate to say it, but a few killjoys like you.
They certainly did a good job of brainwashing you, boy. And with most of the young ones with you. With each succeeding generation, more of our heritage is lost.
He patted the girl's hand.
You're a good girl, Kari. You don't hold with this being cared for like some damned pet poodle.
Never mind, Osmond Eversole. One of Coruscant's alleged uncles grinned. He talks a lot, but of course he doesn't mean a quarter of what he says. Come here, have some wine. He handed a glass to Ludovic. Ludovic sipped and coughed. It tasted as if it were well above the legal alcohol limit, but he didn't like to say anything. They were taking an awful risk, though, doing a thing like that. If they got caught, they might receive a public scolding, which was, of course, no more than they deserved, but he couldn't bear to think of Coruscant exposed to such an ordeal. It's only reasonable that older people should have a thing about being governed by foreigners. Ludovic smiled and set his nearly full glass down on a plinth. You can hardly call the Belfins foreigners. They've been on Earth longer than even the oldest of us. Well, you seem to be pretty chummy with them, the uncle said, looking narrow-eyed at Ludovic. No more so than any other loyal citizen. The uncle sat up and wrapped his arms around his thick, bare legs. He was a powerful, hairy brute of a creature who had not taken advantage of the numerous cosmetic techniques offered by the benevolent Belfins. Don't you think it's funny they can breathe our air so easily? Why shouldn't they? Ludovic bit into an apple that Corisande handed him from one of the dishes of fruit and other delicacies strewn about the courtyard. It's excellent air, especially now that it's all purified. I understand that in the old days. Speaking through a full mouth, the uncle cut him off. Yes, but don't you think it's kind of a coincidence they breathe exactly the same kind of air we do, considering they claim to come from another solar system? No coincidence at all, Ludovic said shortly, no longer able to pretend that he didn't know what the other was getting at. He'd heard the ugly rumor before. Of course, sacrilege was not illegal, but it was in bad taste. Only one combination of elements spawns intelligent life. So they say, the uncle continued, impervious to Ludovic's unconcealed dislike for the subject, that there's really only one Belfin who lives in the Blue Tower, in a tank or something. He can't breathe their atmosphere. Others are some kind of robot that he sends out to do his work for him. Nonsense! Ludovic was goaded to irritation at last. How could a robot have such delicate play of expression, subtle economy of movement? Corisande and the uncle exchanged glances. But they're absolutely blank, the uncle began hesitantly. Perhaps with your rich poetic imagination?
See,
Osmond remarked with satisfaction.
the kid's brainwashed, I told you so.
Even if the Belfin's a single entity, Ludovic went on, it doesn't necessarily make him any less benevolent. He was again interrupted by the grandfather.
I won't listen to any more of this twaddle. Benevolent. Bah! He or she or it to them is or are just plain exploiting us, taking our mineral resources. We have seen them loading ore on the spaceships.
And exchanging it for other resources from the stars, Ludovic said tightly, without which we would not have the perfectly balanced society we have today, without which we would be technologically back in the Dark Ages from which they rescued us. It's not the stuff they bring in from outside that runs the technology. It's some power they've got we can't seem to figure out, though. Lord knows we've tried. Of course they have their own source of power, Ludovic informed them, smiling to himself, for his old Belfin teacher had taken great care to instill a sense of humor in him. A Belfin was explaining that to me only today. 20 heads swiveled toward him. He felt uncomfortable. He was a modest young man, didn't like to be the cynosure of all eyes. Tell us, dear boy, the uncle said, grabbing Ludovic's glass from the plinth and filling it. What exactly did he say? Well, he said the Belfins rule through the power of love. The glass crashed through the tesserae as the uncle uttered a very unworthy word.
And I suppose it was love that killed him, Mixelar and George when they tried to storm the Blue Tower.
Old Osmond began his tale and then halted at the looks he was getting from everyone. Ludovic could no longer pretend his neighbors were a group of eccentrics whom he himself was eccentric enough to regard as charming. So, he stood up and wrapped his mantle around him, I knew you were against the government, and of course you have a legal right to disagree with its policies, but I didn't think you were actual... He dredged up a word out of his school days. Anarchists? He turned to the girl, who was looking thoughtful as she stroked the glittering jewel that always hung at her neck. Corisande, how can you stay with these... He found another word. These subversives. She smiled sadly at him. Don't forget, they're my family, Ludovic. I owe them dutiful respect.
no matter how pig-headed they are. She pressed his hand to hers. But don't give up hope.
That rang a bell inside his brain. "I won't," he vowed, giving her hand a return squeeze. "I promise I won't." Outside the Flockhart Villa, he paused, struggling with his inner self. It was an unworthy thing to inform upon one's neighbors. On the other hand, could he stand idly by and let those neighbors attempt to destroy the social order? Deciding that the greater good was more important, and that, moreover, it was the only way of taking Coruscant away from all this, he went in search of a Belphin. That is, he waited until one glided past and called him to leave the walk. "I wish to report a conspiracy at number 7 Mimosa Lane. The girl is innocent, but the others are in it to the hilt." The Belphin appeared to think for a long moment, then he gave off a smile.
Oh, them. We know. They are harmless.
Harmless? Why, I understand they've tried to attack the Blue Tower by force.
Quite. And they failed, for we are protected from hostile forces, as you were told earlier, by the power of love.
Ludovic knew, of course, that the Belphin used the word love metaphorically. The tower was protected by a series of highly efficient barriers of force to repel attackers, barriers which he realized now, from the sad fate of Miexla and George, were potentially lethal. However, he didn't blame the Belphin for being so cagey about his race's source of power, not with people like the Flockharts running about subverting and whatnot. "You certainly do have a wonderful intercommunication system."
Everything is wonderful, the Belphin said noncommittally. That's why we're so good to you people. Be happy.
And he was off. But Ludovic couldn't be happy. He wasn't precisely sad yet, but he was thoughtful. Of course, the Belphins knew better than he did, but still. Perhaps they underestimated the seriousness of the Flockhart conspiracy. On the other hand, perhaps it was he who was taking the Flockharts too seriously. Perhaps he should investigate further before doing anything rash. Later that night, he slipped over to the Flockhart Villa and nosed about in the courtyard until he found the window behind which the family was conspiring. He peered through he peered through a gap in the curtains so he could both see and hear. This is interesting. I've seen this in a good few of the stories we've been reading recently. Is the use of the word chink as in to say a little crack in something. That word undergone semantic shifts is I know it to mean something very different and something you don't say among polite company. And this is not the first story that's done this. We've had several times. What's the phrase that's it's a gap in a piece of armor? I'm thinking a glint in the armor, but that's not right. Is this coming from the sense of a chink in one's armor, an area of vulnerability? I guess. Yeah. I guess. I'm just gonna. Yeah, it's whatever. I'll figure out more after the stream. I'm just very fascinated because this is the fourth or fifth time that it said this instead of a crack in the curtains, because immediately my brain glazed over. I was like, oh, a crack in the curtains, and I stumbled because I looked at it again and that didn't say crack in the curtains. Sorry. Easily distracted as is tradition around here. Anyway, he's peering through a crack in the curtains. Coruscant was saying, so I think there's a lot in what Ludovic said. Bless her, he thought emotionally. Even in the midst of her plotting, she had time to spare a kind word for him. And then it hit him. She, too, was a plotter.
You suggest we try to turn the power of love against the Belphins?
The uncle asked, ironically. Coruscant gave a rippling laugh as she twirled her glittering pendant.
In a manner of speaking. I have an idea for a secret weapon which might do the trick.
At that moment, Ludovic stumbled over a jug which some careless relative had apparently left lying about the courtyard. It crashed to the tesserae, spattering Ludovic's legs and sandals with a liquid which later proved to be extremely red wine.
"There's someone outside,"
the uncle declared, half rising.
"Nonsense,"
Coruscant said, putting her hand on his shoulder.
"I didn't hear anything."
The uncle looked dubious, and Ludovic thought it prudent to withdraw at this point. Besides, he'd heard enough. His Coruscant, was an integral part of the conspiracy. He lay down to sleep that night, beset by doubts. If he told the Belphins about the conspiracy, he'd be betraying Coruscant. As a matter of fact, he now remembered, he already had told them about the conspiracy. They hadn't believed him. But supposing he could convince them, how could he give Coruscant up to them? True, it was the right thing to do, but for the first time in his life, he couldn't bring himself to do what he knew to be right. He was weak. Weakness was sinful. His old Belfin teacher had taught him that, too. As Ludovic writhed restlessly upon his bed, he became aware that someone had come into his bedchamber.
"Ludovic,"
a soft, beloved voice whispered,
"I've come to ask your help."
It was so dark he couldn't see her. He knew where she was only by the glitter of the jewel on her neck chain as it arced through the blackness. Coruscant.
"Ludovic."
Now that the amenities were over, she resumed.
"Against my will, I've been involved in the family plot. My uncle's invented a secret weapon which he believes will counteract the power of the barriers."
But I thought you devised it.
"So it was you in the courtyard. Well, what happened is I wanted to gain time, so I said I had a secret weapon of my own invention which I'd not perfected, but would cost considerably less than my uncle's model. We have to watch the budget, you know. We can hardly expect the Belphins to supply the components for the job. Anyhow, I thought while my folks were waiting for me to finish it, you'd have a chance to warn the Belphins."
Coruscant, you're as noble and clever as you are beautiful. But then he caught the full import of her remarks. Me? But they won't pay any attention to me.
"How do you know?"
When he remained silent, she said,
"I suppose you've already tried to warn them about us."
I said you had nothing to do with the plot."
"That was good of you."
She continued in a warmer tone.
"How many Belphins did you warn then?"
Just the one. When you tell one something, they all know it. Everyone knows that.
"That's just a theory. It's never been proven. All we do know is that they have some sort of central clearinghouse of information, presumably the Belphin of Belphins, but we don't know that they're incapable of thinking or acting individually. We don't really know much about them at all. They're very secretive, you know."
Aloof, as benefits a ruling race, but always affable.
You must warn as many Belphins as you can.
And if none listens to me?
Then you must approach the Belphin of Belphins himself."
But no human beings ever come near him. You know all those who have tried have perished. That can't be a rumor your grandfather said.
"But they came to attack the Belphin. You're coming to warn him. That makes a big difference, Ludovic."
She took his hands in hers. In the darkness, the jewel swung madly on her presumably heaving bosom.
"This is bigger than both of us. It's for the Earth."
He knew it was his patriotic duty to do as she said. Still, he'd enjoyed life so much. Coruscant, wouldn't it be much simpler if we just destroyed your uncle's secret weapon?
"Well, he'd only make another. Don't you see, Ludovic? This is our only chance to save the Belphins, to save humanity even. Of course, I don't have the right to send you. I could go myself."
No, Coruscant. I can't let you go. I'll do it. Next morning, he set out to warn Belphins. He knew it wasn't much use, but it was all he could do. The first half-dozen responded in much the same way the Belphin he'd warned the previous day had done, by courteously acknowledging his solicitude and assuring him there was no need for alarm. They knew all about the Flockharts, and everything would be right. Well, everything would be all right. After that, they started to get increasingly huffy. which would, he thought, substantiate the theory that they were all part of one vast coordinate network of identity, especially since each Belfin behaved as if Ludovic had been repeatedly annoying him. Finally, they refused to get off the walks when he hailed them, which was unheard of. No Belfin had ever before failed to respond to an Earthman's call. When he started running along the walks after them, they ran much faster than he could. At last, he gave up and wandered about the city for hours, speaking to neither human nor Belfin, wondering what to do. That is, he knew what he had to do, he was wondering how to do it. He would never be able to reach the Belfin of Belfins. No human being had ever done it. Miexislaw and George had died trying to reach him, or perhaps it would be the better pronoun there. Even though their intentions had been hostile, and Ludovic's would be helpful, there was little chance that he'd be allowed to reach the Belfin with all the other Belfins against him. What guarantee was there that the Belfin would not be against him too? I want to clarify for those of you who don't have the book open, that little aside about pronouns, that was not me. That was in the book. I just want to make sure that was obvious. Anyway, and yet he knew that he would have to risk his life. There was no help for it. He had never wanted to be a hero, and here he was, having had heroism thrust upon him. He knew he could not succeed. Equally well, he knew he couldn't turn back, for his Belfin teacher had instructed him in the meaning of duty. It was twilight when he was approaching the Blue Tower. Commending himself to the infinite virtue, he entered. The Belfin at the reception desk did not give up the customary smiling expression. In fact, he seemed to radiate a curiously apprehensive aura.
"Go back, young man. You're not wanted here," he said.
"I must see the Belfin of Belfins. I must warn him against the Flockharts."
"He's been warned. Go home and be happy."
"I don't trust you or your brothers. I must see the Belfin himself." Suddenly, this particular Belfin lost his commanding manners. He began to wilt insofar as so rigidly constructed a creature could go limp.
"Please, we've done this for you. Go do this for us."
"The Belfin of Belfin did things for us. You are all only his followers. How do I know you're really following? How do I know you haven't turned against him?" Without giving the creature a chance to answer, he strode forward. The Belfin attempted to bar his way. Ludovic knew one Belfin was as myriad times as strong as a human, so it was out of utter futility that he struck. The Belfin collapsed completely, flying apart in a welter of fragile springs and gears. The fact was of some deeper significance, Ludovic knew, but he was too numbed by his incredible success to be able to think clearly. All he knew was that the Belfin would be able to explain things to him. Bells began to clash and clang. That meant the force barriers had gone up. He could see the shimmering insubstance of the first one before him. Squaring his shoulders, he charged it and walked right through. He looked himself up and down. He was alive and entire. And the whole thing was a fraud. The barriers weren't lethal, or perhaps even actual. But what of Miexislaw and George, and countless rumored others? He wouldn't let himself even try to think of them. He wouldn't even let himself try to think of anything save his duty. A staircase spiraled up ahead of him. A Belfin was at its foot. Behind him, a barrier iridesced.
"Please, young man, you don't understand. Let me explain."
But Ludovic destroyed the thing before I could say anything further, and he passed right through the barrier. He had to get to the top and warn the Belfin of Belfins, whoever or whatever he or it was, that the Flockharts had a secret weapon which might be able to annihilate it or him. Belfin after Belfin Ludovic destroyed. Barrier after barrier he penetrated until he reached the top. At the head of the stairs was a vast golden door.
"Go no further, Ludovic Eversoul,"
A mighty voice roared from within.
"To open that door is to bring disaster upon your race."
But all Ludovic knew was that he had to get to the Belfin within and warn him. He battered down the door. That is, he would have battered down the door if it had not turned out to be unlocked. A stream of noxious vapor rushed out of the opening, causing him to black out. When he came to, most of the vapor had dissipated. The Belfin of Belfins was already dying of asphyxiation, since it was, in fact, a single alien entity who breathed another combination of elements. The room at the head of the stairs had been its tank. gasped.
Through your model-headed integrity, you have not only destroyed me, but the Earth's future. I tried to make this planet a better place for humanity. This is my reward.
But I don't understand. Why did you let me do it? Why were Miex, Law, and George and all the others killed? Why was it that I could pass the barriers and they could not?
The barriers were triggered to respond to hostility. You meant well, so our defenses could not work.
Ludovic had to bend low to hear the creature's last word.
There is Earth proverb that should have warned me. I can protect myself against my enemies, but who will protect me from my friends?
The Belfin of Belfins died in Ludovic's arms. He was the last of his race, so far as Earth was concerned, for no more came. If, as they had said themselves, some outside power had sent them to take care of the human race, then that power had given up the race as a bad job. If they were merely exploiting the Earth, as the malcontents kept suggesting, apparently it had proven too dangerous or too costly a venture. Shortly after the Belfin's demise, the Flockhearts arrived en masse.
We won't need your secret weapons now,
Ludovic told them dully.
The Belfin of the Belfins is dead.
Corazon gave one of the rippling laughs he had grown to hate so much. Darling, you were my secret weapon all along. She beamed at her relatives, and then he noticed the faint lines of her forehead. I told you I could use the power of love to destroy the Belfins. And then she added gently, I think there's no doubt who's head of this family now. The uncle gave a strained laugh.
You're going to have a great little first lady there, boy,
he said to Ludovic.
First lady,
Ludovic repeated, still absorbed in his grief.
Yes, I imagine the people will want to make you our first president by popular acclaim.
Ludovic looked at him through a haze of tears.
But I killed the Belfin. Didn't mean to, but they must hate me.
Nonsense, my boy. They'll adore you. You'll be a hero.
Events proved him right. Even those people who had lived in apparent content under the Belfins, accepting what they were given and seemingly enjoying their carefree lives, now declared themselves to have been suffering in silent resentment all along. They hurled flowers and adulatory speeches at Ludovic and composed extremely flattering songs about him. Shortly after he was universally acclaimed president, he married Corazon. He couldn't escape.
Why doesn't she become president herself?
He wailed when the relatives came and found him hiding in the ruins of the Blue Tower. The people had torn the tower down as soon as they were sure the Belfin was dead, and the others thereby rendered inoperant.
It'd spare her a lot of bother.
Because she's not the Belfin's lair,
the uncle said, dragging him out.
Besides, she loves you. Come on, Ludovic, be a man.
So they hauled him off to the wedding, and amid much feasting he was married to Corazon. He never drew another happy breath. In the first place, now that the Belfin was dead, all the machinery that had been operated by him stopped, and no one knew how to fix it. The sidewalks stopped moving, the air conditioners stopped conditioning, food synthesizers stopped synthesizing, so on and so forth. And of course everyone blamed it all on Ludovic, even that year's run of bad weather. There were famines, riots, plagues, and after the waves of mob hostility had coalesced into national groupings, war. It was like the old days again, precisely as described in the textbooks. In the second place, Ludovic could never forget that when Corazon had sent him to the Blue Tower, she could not have been sure that her secret weapon would work. Love might not have conquered all. In fact, it was the more likely hypothesis that it wouldn't, and he would have been killed by the first barrier. And no husband likes to think that his wife thinks he is expendable. It makes him feel like she doesn't really love him. So, in his 30th year of his reign as dictator of Earth, Ludovic poisoned Corazon. That is, had her poisoned. For by now he had a minister of assassination to handle such little matters. And he married a very pretty, very young, very affectionate blonde. He wasn't particularly happy with her either, mind, but, well, it was at least a change. That was The Blue Tower by Evelyn E. Smith. Very, very reminiscent of The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, to me, you know, giving humanity enough rope to handle itself, so to speak. That was a good one. That was a good little short story. I really like that one. Very fun. I'm a big fan. We've got time for one more, I'd say. Uh, what's Assassin? How long is that? Let's find out. Oh yeah, we can. Maybe, perhaps. What else do we have? Have we already done So They Baked a Cake? Let me make sure we haven't done So We Baked the Cake already. Oh yeah, we haven't done this. Okay, yeah, let's do So We Baked a Cake. We'll come back to Assassin later. Uh, last story of the night, So They Baked a Cake by Winston Marks. This is from Dynamic Science Fiction, the January 1954 issue. I don't think I've ever heard of Dynamic Science Fiction as a publication, so we'll see. Maybe this story will suck me into picking up some issues of Dynamic to go with our issues of Astounding. We'll see. Sure, I was one of the tough guys who said it'd be great, just great, to get away from the boiling mess of humanity that stank up every inhabitable rock on Earth. Well, not being the Daniel Boone type, this was my private qualification for the job. Being fed up to here with people, with the smothering bureaucracy of world government, with restrictions and rationing and synthetic diet supplements and synthetic blondes and mass hypochondria and phony emotions and standing in line to get into a pay toilet. I hated my profession, trying to wring glamorous interviews out of bewildered heroes and press agents' darlings and pompous politicians, snotty millionaires, brave little wrong chorus girls. Their lives were no more glamorous than their readers. They were the same mixture of greed and fear and smelly sweat and deceit and two-bit passion. My particular prostitution was to transform their peccadillos into virtues, their stubbed toes into tragedies, and, well, their fornications into romance. And I'd been at it so long, couldn't stand the smell of my own typewriter. Of course, I was so thunderstruck as being chosen on one of the 21-man crew for the Albert E. I never got to gloating over it much until we were out in deep space. Yeah, it was quite an honor, to say nothing of the pure luck involved. Something like winning the Luna sweepstakes, only twice as exclusive. We were the pioneers on the first starship, first to try out the Larson drive in deep space. At last, man's travel would be measured in parsecs. Our destination was 26 trillion miles down near the celestial South Pole. Not much more than a parsec, mind, but parsec nonetheless. As a journalist, such distances and the fabulous velocities involved, they were quite meaningless to me. My appointment as official scribe for the expedition wasn't based on my galactic know-how, but rather on my reputation as a Nobel-winning columnist, lucky one out of 56 who entered the lottery. Larson himself would keep me supplied with the science data. I was to chronicle the events from the human interest side, as well as recording the technical stuff they fed me. But actually, I had no intentions of writing a single word. Hell with posterity, immortality of a race that couldn't read without moving its lips. Square case I carried aboard, so tenderly contained not my portable typewriter, but 6 bottles of forbidden rye whiskey. I intended to drink every drop of it myself. So at last we were in space after weeks of partying, dedication, speech-making, farewell dinners, none of which aroused in me a damn regret for my decision to forsake my generation of fellow scrabblers. Yeah, we were all warned that as fast as the Larson Drive was, it'd still take us 42 years Earth-measured time to reach our destination. Even if we found no planets to explore, turn right round and come back, the round trip would consume the lifetimes of even the new babies we left behind. To me, this was bit perversely comforted. All I wanted to know was how they expected me to live long enough to complete the journey. Could think of pleasanter ways to spend my last days than cooped up in this sardine can with a passel of fish-faced, star-happy scientists. I was 48 when we left. Make me a lucky 90 if I was still wriggling when we hove into the port. But the math types, they said to relax. Their space-time theory provided, at least they said, neat device for survival on our high-velocity journey. So the story went. The faster a body moves in reference to another, the slower time appears to be acting on the movie body. If, they said, man could travel at the speed of light, supposedly time would stand still for him. This, I reflected, would mean human immortality. Much too good for folks. Anyway, since our average velocity for the trip was planned to come out around a tenth of the speed of light to us on the outward E, only about 5 months would elapse for the journey that'd take up those 42 and a half years Earth time. Seemed to me they were laying a hell of a lot of faith in a theory that we were testing out. Our food, water, and air supplies gave us a very small safety margin. Strict rationing would be self-sufficient for 12 months. Left us 2 months to fool around looking for a place to sit down. Mentioned this item to Larson on the second day out. Found him in a coffee mess, sitting alone, staring at his big, ugly, hairy hands. He's a tall Swede with a slight stoop and the withdrawn manner of a myopic scholar. As commander of the ship, he had the right to keep aloof, but as scribe, I had the privilege of chewing him for information. I said, Skipper, if it took us generations to discover all the planets in our own little solar system, what do you figure the chances are of spotting a planet near our goal in the short time of 2 months? He was silent while I drew my ration of coffee and sugar. Then he opened his hands and seemed to find words written on his palms. His eyes never did come up from beneath his shaggy eyebrows. If they exist, he said slowly, we might find one. We will have better telescopes, and our vantage point in space will be superior. He was a sorry-looking specimen. I remembered that the 50-year-old scientist had left behind a youngish wife who adored the ground he walked on. The handsome blonde woman stood heroically beside the ramp and watched dry-eyed as her husband descended. There had been no visible exchange of farewells at the end while he stood next to me in the airlock. They just stared into each other's eyes, oblivious to everything but the maudlin sorrow of their separation. And the portal closed and windowed her, and I had the feeling that Larson was going to tear at the great threaded door with his bare hands, renounce the whole project, but he stood there, breathing a little heavy, clenching his tremendous hands till it was time to take off. Well, in a way, I envied him an emotion that long since died in me, dead of that slow, corrosive poison of contempt for the whole human race, dead and pickled in the formaldehyde of 10,000 columns which the syndicates had paid me nothing but cold money. Here was a man whose heart could still love, and I hated him for it. I said, maybe you look like you still have regrets. This isn't worth personal sacrifices for you, after all. If we don't find an inhabitable planet, we won't have accomplished much. You are wrong. We've already served our purpose. Testing out the drive, you mean? He nodded. This morning, in our last radio contact with Earth, I dispatched the word, the Larson drive is successful. We've passed from our solar system on schedule, and our measurements of ship objective time check out with the theory. Roughly, at least. He spread his hands out on the table. This was our primary goal. The expedition ahead is subsidiary. Colonization may result from our exploration, true, but now we've opened the universe. It was nice to know things were progressing as planned. I asked, what do you mean about things checking roughly? Is there some kind of error? He nodded and swallowed the dregs from the magnesium cup. A considerable error, but it's on the safe side. Our velocity checks perfectly, but our estimate of the time shrinkage factor is so far off that Mr. Einstein's formulae will take some major revision to reconcile what's happened. We'll arrive sooner than planned? Larson nodded again. According to the shipboard, elapsed time will arrive in the vicinity of our destination in just 92 hours from now, a total of 122 hours since takeoff. You were worrying earlier about our scanty supplies. This should put your mind at rest. Well, it didn't displease me. The lack of privacy on the tin bathtub was even worse than I'd anticipated. The news came as sort of a reprieve. I looked at Larson and I suddenly knew why the long face. His Tina. For her, 10 years would already have passed, and as we sat there talking, weeks of her existence were fading into oblivion, and Hans Larson was begrudging every single second of it. Damn fool, he should have stayed at home. I left him brooding into his empty cup and went forward to the little control dome. One wonderful little attribute of the Larson drive was there was no acceleration discomfort. Gravity was nullified at the outset, and the ship's gravity was kept at a comfortable 1/2 G. Personally, I'd have left it on just a standard G instead of having to bounce around, but that's just my take. Yeah, as soon as they named the ship the Albert E, I was like, oh, they're doing this. I think I know how this one goes. Just this is a very popular trope that's been expanded on a lot. So, bonus points if you in the chat know where this goes too. Mac Hulbert, chief navigator. Mac Hulbert, chief navigator, was alone up there, 1 foot cocked up on the edge of the broad instrument board that looked like a cluttered desktop with handles. He was staring out into the void. Yes, void. They had said that it would be black in space, but not even a glimmer of light showed through the transparent dome. As you looked to the side and back behind you, faint, violent specks seemed to catch at your peripheral vision, but it was impossible to focus on a single heavenly body. Mac didn't turn or greet me. His face was no longer that of the carefree adventurer with whom I'd tied on a fair binge less than a week ago. "Getting you down too, Mac?" I asked. He was about the only one aboard I could even tolerate. He wasn't as sour on humanity as I, but he granted me the right to my opinions, which was something. "God, yes. Skipper tell you about that time error?" "Yes, but what's there to be sad about? You don't mind that part, do you?" To my knowledge, Mac hadn't left anything behind but his dirty laundry. Hubert was in his mid-30s, slender, balding, and normally as cheerful and stupidly optimistic as they come, but now he looked worse off than Larson. "Yeah, I mind that," he said kind of resentfully. "I thought we'd have more time to, sort of get used to the idea of, well, outgrowing our generation, but think, by now many of my older buddies are dead. 12 World Series are over. Maybe there's even a war going on back there." Of all the morbid nonsense, yearning for the obituary column, the sports page, and the headlines. But then people are rarely sensible when something disturbs their tidy little universe they take for granted. It was a little terrifying, though, staring out into that smothering lamp black. We were moving so fast and living so slowly, even the light waves from the galaxies toward which we'd moved had disappeared. We were reversing the redshift effect of receding light sources. We approached the stars before us at such a velocity, their light impinged at a rate above the visible violet spectrum. "It'll never work out." "What won't?" "Colonization, not at these unholy distances. Even if we find an Earth-type planet or two, people won't leave everything behind them like this. I'm cut off. Something's gone. Everything, everybody we knew back there. Terrible thought to consider." "Oh, yeah?" As the prince of all boys, grown upset with his food. I posted something about this on TikTok the other day, but Magnus just sits here and buries his food like it's the worst thing in the world. "Don't ya?" "Yeah, I'm calling you out in front of the internet. You sit there and you bury your food like I'm giving you, 6 months old moldy food. Like I didn't just buy it the other day. Calling you out, sir." Anyway, I sat down beside him, stared out into the India ink blackness, and faced a few overdue realities myself. Our chances of finding a habitable planet were remote. Finding intelligent life on it was even more unlikely. That such life would resemble men as we know them were so improbable, the odds in favor were virtually non-existent. So what did I really have to look forward to? A quick survey of the star system in the company of these nincompoop idiot Hideo savants, and then A return to a civilization of complete strangers, a culture in which we'd all be anachronisms almost a century behind the times. A parade of faces began peering at me out of the darkness. There was Bess with the gold hair, and Carol and Petite Annette, and Cliff, my red-headed old roommate who knew how to charcoal broil steak, and our bachelor apartment with a battered old TV set, my collection of books and pipes. There was my outboard jet up on a lovely Lake Vermilion where a man could still catch a fat pike. What did it be like when we got back? More people, less food, tighter rationing, crowding beyond conception. Hell. When the rest of the crew learned of our sharply revised estimated time of a revival, they came down with the same emotional cramps afflicting Larson and Hubert. It was sickening. A bunch of so-called mature technicians and scientists moping around like a barracks full of drafted rookies, matching miniature billfold photos of cuties that were now approaching cronehood. The whole venture had become a tragic affair overnight, and for the next few days all thoughts had turned backwards. So nobody was remotely prepared for what happened. They were even unprepared to think straight, with their heads instead of their hearts. And Larson was worst of all. On the last day, Larson eased off our 1,800-mile-per-second velocity as the stars started showing again, shifting from faint violet down to the more cheerful spectrum. Spirits aboard began lifting. A little. I was in the control room with Larson and Mac when we got our first inkling. Mac was fooling with the electronic search gear, sweeping for planets, when he gave a yip and pointed a jabbing finger at the scope.
Audio! Look at that!
He lengthened the sweep, and the jumble of vertical lines spread out like a picket fence made of rubber.
A carrier wave! With audio modulation,
he said, with disbelief all over his face. Larson remained calm.
I hear you, lad. Don't shout.
He studied the signal and frowned deeply.
It's faint, but you can get a fix.
As they played with the instruments, I looked forward through the green shield that protected us from Alpha C's heavy radiation. Our destination star was now a brilliant blob dominating our piece of heaven. It was a difficult thing to grasp that we'd traveled almost 26 trillion miles in 5 days ship time.
It's a planet, sure enough, but that audio. Forget the audio. Give me a bearing. Let's be getting on course. Maybe the only planet in the system. I don't want to lose it.
Larson snapped. His arms pumped and his big hands pawed at the controls as he brought the inertialess drive into manual manipulations. For the next few tense hours, we stalked the planet at a discreetly low velocity. When his navigation problem was complete and we were on a slow approach orbit, Mac began playing with the communication rig again. As the ship's intercom cut in, we had to chase people out as excitement mounted over our discovery. Finally, when his elbow had been jostled once too often, Larson ordered the control room cleared of all hands but Hulbert and me. When we were alone, Larson said,
"This is fantastic."
Mac's face was tied into an amazed scowl, too, as he studied the feeble little patterns on his wave analyzer.
"You got it. We got ourselves a sweet little Earth-type planet, if we can believe the spectro, unless I'm stark space-happy. There's something or somebody down there. Beaming a broadcast smack in our direction, following us around like the string on a yo-yo." "How do you figure that?"
Mac replied.
"At this distance, the field strength's too strong for anything but a beam transmission. Mister, they've got us bracketed."
Mac swung to the panel on his left and cut in the communication circuit.
"Strong enough to listen to now. See what kind of gibberish we can wring out of the carrier wave."
He threw a couple of switches and hunted for the exact frequency. A whisper and rustle of the carrier brushed the speaker. Mac centered in and turned up the volume. Then even I sucked air in. A voice issued from the sound cone, a man's voice. "Come to New Columbia. Welcome, Albert E. Come in, please. Welcome to New Columbia. Welcome, Albert E. Come in, please." It repeated over and over. Larson let his breath go first with a nervous snort. Mac and Larson both looked at me as if maybe I had something to do with it. Hands trembling, Mac picked up the microphone and reached for the transmitter switch, but Larson grabbed the mic from his hand.
"Not so fast, damn it."
"But they know we're up here. They even know the name of our ship," Mac protested. "And our language," I added. I wasn't bored anymore. Larson nodded slowly.
What kind of devilish intelligence have we run into? I need time to think.
The way he said it sent a cold draft down my spine. Then my imagination started catching up to his. At our rate of approach to the star system, how could any living being have had time to sense our presence, pick our brains to learn our ship's name, our language, master our method of communication, contrive a transmitter, get on the air? The magnitude of the accomplishment sent the importance of our little triumph of space travel tumbling into a cocked limbo of insignificance. For a moment I considered the old curvature of space concept. Could we somehow have doubled back, completed a mystic circle? Was that old Sol up there burning through our green shield? What a laugh would that be! The mental giants of our time, backtracking and circling like a tenderfoot lost in the woods on Lake Minnetonka. Mac cut off the transmitter reluctantly, but he said, "Yeah, I guess I see what you mean, Skipper." Larson got to his feet and paced the crowded wedge of a space, punching a fist into his other hand with soft, meaty slaps. He stopped and listened to the soft muttering of the speaker and shook his head.
Makes no sense. It's impossible, utterly impossible.
The man's voice from the planet implacably continued repeating the message. No trace of an accent, nothing to suggest an alien origin in his tone, pitch, or enunciation. Perhaps that's what threw Larson so hard. There'd been the faintest taint of otherworldliness about it. I think he'd have hauled stakes and gotten us out of there, but the song of this siren was too powerful. The irresistible mental image of a fellow human out there in the bottom of space was salt in the bleeding wounds of Larson's loneliness. He stared out where the planet must be, some million miles before us, and suddenly the tenseness relaxed from his face. He got the damnedest expression of mixed incredulity, hopefulness, and sorrow. Tears began welling from his eyes and streaming down the rugged contours of his cheeks. It didn't add, nor could I reason a motive for his laconic command. "Intersection orbit, Mr. Hulbert. We'll take her down," he said quietly, and that was all. He hunched over the control board and moved things according to Mac's computations. Soon I could make out the planet. We came in from an obtuse angle with its sun, so it showed first as a crescent of pale green silver. Then it filled the viewing dome, and Mac began working the homing equipment. "May I acknowledge their message now, Skipper?" Larson shook his head with compressed lips.
"If we're going in anyway."
"No!" Larson exploded, and his voice softened.
"I think I know the mystery of the voice. It must be. But if it isn't, if I'm wrong, God alone knows. We've got to chance it. I don't want to know differently until it's too late."
This was just real great. Larson had some fantastic notion, and he wanted it to be true so damn bad. He was taking us into blind jeopardy when we had the means to probe it first. Real scientific, that one. Humans. Men, their so-called sense of reason. Larson was a crowning example of this sloppy-hearted thing I was fleeing when I embarked on this joyride, and now it'd probably be my undoing. We were homing in on the transmission from New Columbia, easing down to the atmosphere, and now clouds and land and water formations took shape. The beam led us to the sunlit rim of dawn, and suddenly we were hovering over a great forest slit at intervals with streaks of glittering blue that looked like deep, wide rivers. Now Mac touched the switch, and the CW whistle gave us a tight audio beam to follow to the source of the signal. Larson switched to the micro-landing controls to ride in like a jetliner on the Frisco-Shanghai run. We slanted gently down until the forest became trees, and the little blue-green splotches were We slanted gently down until the forest became trees, and the little blue-green splotches were lush, grassy meadows. And there was the tower and the low buildings and the spaceship. Something happened to me inside when I saw that. It was a kind of tremolo feeling, like a note in a new symphony. A note that springs, free and alone, wavering uncertainly, and you don't know which way it'll turn. In seconds that seemed like hours, we were on the ground, the ramp was jammed out, and Larson was blundering down it, crying like a baby. I stood in the port, breathing the warm air, redolent with exotic new scents, and yawped like an idiot, trying to make sense of the huge banner strung 100 yards across one side of that little village. The banner read, "Welcome, Hans. Welcome, Albert E. We knew you were coming, so..."
Near the center of the banner was the largest chocolate cake, or perhaps a facsimile thereof, in all creation. Must have been 10 feet high and 20 feet in diameter. But Hans Larson, was not amused by this cosmic gag. He galloped off that gangplank like a lovesick gorilla. I'm a comet's uncle. If Tina wasn't there, racing out to meet him. Larson had guessed the truth, and no wonder he hadn't had the guts to test it beforehand. By the time I got down, out and over to where they were all wrapped up, mingling tears, I had pretty well doped out myself. I don't know why we'd figured that all progress and improvement in interstellar flight would cease just because we'd left Earth. The eternal, colossal conceit of men, I guess. When our last signal back to Earth had given the OK sign, sure, they started building bigger ships and recruiting another crew. By the time the Albert E-2 was ready to take off for a more extended expedition, the Larson drive was now the Larson-McKendrick drive, velocity full half the speed of light, some 5 times our own velocity. Somehow, Tina had managed to get herself in the party as Hans sensed she would. And all the time differential, as it worked out, wasn't too bad at all. Tina had only been 32 when we left her on Earth. Including the year and a half she'd already been with the colony on New Columbia, she was still quite a bit younger than Hans, just twice as pretty as the day of their separation. That tremolo note was rising now, the soft, mystic pitch of excitement inherent in a new world. I turned to Mac, who was grinning like to split his face, and I said, "Looks like you were wrong, old boy, about that impossibility of colonizing." He nodded his head readily, but he wouldn't tear his eyes away from that monstrous, preposterous chocolate cake. The attraction, I discovered, was a little bevy of onlookers who stood at its base. They were a dozen or more of the most attractive colonists in the younger age bracket, and unmistakably of the opposite sex. Max said, "Yeah, I was wrong about colonizing prospects. Dead wrong. Aren't you glad?" And now that tremolo feeling split into a crescendo of subharmonics and overtones, magnificent chord of attunement with life and humanity everywhere in the universe. And at once I knew I was glad, happy as hell, to see these people from the old hometown of Earth. I wasn't expecting that to go well. I wasn't expecting that to have a happy ending. And it's getting to me a little bit. I am so used to that trope of, oh yeah, they're traveling to this planet at near light speed, and they just get there and find that all of like the technology is bettered, and they have completely lost their whole lives, and they are now relics. I was fully expecting it to spin that way. I've never seen that done such that the advancement of technology has aligned to give them a happy ending. That was wild. Like, the whole time, there was just a movie that used this same basic premise, Lightyear, right? And I've never seen someone use the premise of, time dilation rather than the time dilation having them isolated and feeling like they're returning to a foreign country in as much as the past is a foreign country, and that goes both ways. I've never seen that done to have a happy ending. Fascinating. I might have to see if I can dig up more of these issues of dynamic science fiction. If there's more of these that turn what are now modern science fiction tropes on their head and give them pleasant endings, I'm fascinated. I'm interested. That was really good. That's a fantastic note to end on. What am I going to say before I'm done here? Once again, if you have some books you'd like me to read for Paper Cuts, there is a Discord. I have a YouTube, obviously. Well, not obviously. The podcast is the obvious part, but I have a YouTube. It's where all the stream VODs and anything else I really feel like making go. So the video, the vodcast, as it were, for Paper Cuts, goes up on YouTube, But Paper Cuts in particular is also a podcast. So if you want to hear an edited down version of the stream, mostly cutting out cat problems and me digressing for way too long, go check out Paper Cuts in your favorite podcatcher. What else have I been doing lately? I've been posting short clips to TikTok. If you don't feel like trying to watch entire VODs to figure out if it's one you want to watch, TikTok and or YouTube Shorts are great for that. Um, what else? Like I said, I already mentioned Codex group projects. Hopefully, I'll manage to make it into a book club for once. I always say, "Oh man, I want to do the book club," or "Oh, I don't really like the book this month," and then either way I don't get around to it. I should really show up to those because they're really fun. Do you got any other projects I'm working on? Nothing I've told y'all about. Tune in next week. We'll be playing more Control. We'll be playing Control until I finish the story, and it's taking its sweet time. I'm enjoying that a great deal. It's a great game, and I'm having a great time playing it. But we'll be playing that until the story's done over there. Tune in next week. We will be reading a new book. Let me give you a hint about what book we're reading. I think I have an idea of what I want to do. I have to just double check that I have it. Do I want to go back to that yet, or do I have another? Do I have another one in mind? Yeah, I know what I'm gonna do. I'll give you a hint, and it kind of plays into. I will tell you that next week's book plays into a kind of theme we've had going here about visiting other worlds, and let's just say it is it is something that people bring up as a joke, being the prototypical example of an isekai, and that's the hint you get. So feel free to tune in same time next week for Paper Cuts, and I suggest dropping by for Control. If you've been missing watching me play video games, that's what Tuesday nights for. Is it's games. Anyway, this has been Paper Cuts, and I hope.